I showed up to my wife's law school graduation party that I paid for, only for the venue to be closed. I called my wife. She said the party ended 2 hours ago. I guess I didn't want you there. Then I saw my wife's post on her social media, thanking her office lover for sponsoring her education. So I walked away, quietly canceled every payment, and sold my 90% stake in her new boyfriend's company, $157 million worth. Minutes later, my phone lit up with 156 missed calls, and someone showed up at my door. So there I was, cruising down Fifth Avenue in my Tesla Model S, feeling pretty damn good about myself. Tonight was supposed to be the night, Leah's law school graduation party at that swanky venue in downtown Manhattan that cost me more than most people's annual salary. 48 grand for one night, plus premium everything, because my wife had champagne tastes and zero understanding of budgets. Not that it mattered to me. Hell, I'd have paid double just to see her face light up when she walked into that place. The jazz trio she'd handpicked was probably warming up right about now, and the catering team was likely putting the finishing touches on those ridiculous gold-leafed appetizers she'd insisted on. It's a once-in-a-lifetime celebration, she'd said, batting those gorgeous brown eyes at me. We needed to be perfect, and like the lovesick fool I apparently was, I nodded and pulled out my black Amex without hesitation. Traffic was surprisingly light for a Friday evening in Manhattan, which should have been my first red flag. Usually, getting to downtown venues during peak hours is like trying to navigate through molasses while being attacked by angry cab drivers. But tonight, smooth sailing. Almost too smooth, if you catch my drift. I pulled up to the venue and immediately knew something was off. The place was darker than my ex-mother-in-law's soul. No valet, no warm lighting spilling onto the sidewalk, no sounds of celebration echoing from inside. Just silence and shadows. My gut started doing this annoying little dance it does when things are about to go sideways. I parked and walked up to the main entrance, my Italian leather shoes clicking against the pavement like a countdown timer. The doors were locked tight. Not just "we're running late" locked, but "nobody's been here for hours" locked. I pressed my face against the glass, cupping my hands to block out the streetlight glare. Empty. Completely, utterly, soul-crushingly empty. My phone was already in my hand before my brain fully processed what I was seeing. Speed dial number 1, Leah. Straight to voicemail. Her voice, all bright and cheerful. "Hi. You've reached Leah? I'm probably too busy being awesome to answer right now. So leave a message and I'll get back to you when I can." Even her voicemail was cocky. I should have seen the warning signs years ago. I tried again. And again. On the fourth attempt, she finally picked up. "Oh, hey babe." Her voice was light, almost musical. There was background noise, laughter, clinking glasses, the kind of sounds you'd expect from a party in full swing. "Leah, where are you?" "I'm at the venue, and it's completely dark. The doors are locked." A pause. Then that laugh. The one I used to think was adorable, but now sounded like nails on a chalkboard. "Oh, the party ended 2 hours ago. I guess I didn't want you there." The words hit me like a freight train carrying a cargo of what the actual hell. "What do you mean you didn't want me there? I paid for the entire thing." "I know, and it was beautiful. Everyone had such a wonderful time. The jazz trio was perfect, by the way. Great choice." Her voice was so casual, so matter-of-fact, like she was discussing the weather or commenting on a nice restaurant meal. "Leah, this is insane. You can't just..." Click. She hung up on me. Actually hung up. Like I was some telemarketer trying to sell her extended warranty coverage on a car she didn't own. I stood there on the sidewalk, staring at my phone like it had personally betrayed me. Cars were whooshing by. People were walking past with their Friday night plans, and the city was humming along like nothing had happened. But my world had just tilted off its axis. That's when I made my second mistake of the evening. I opened Instagram. There it was, posted just 45 minutes ago. Leah in that champagne gold dress I'd bought her last month from some boutique in Soho that charged more per square inch of fabric than NASA spends on heat shields. She looked absolutely stunning, I'll give her that. Her dark hair was perfectly styled, her makeup was flawless, and she was glowing with happiness. She was also kissing Dominic Kane. Dominic fucking Kane. Her senior partner at the law firm, the guy she'd talked about constantly for months. Oh, Dominic thinks this, and Dominic suggested that. And Dominic is such a brilliant legal mind. I'd started calling him Dominic this, Dominic that in my head months ago, because his name came up in every damn conversation. But here's the real kicker, the caption under the photo. Couldn't have done it without you. My sponsor through law school, Red Heart. My sponsor. My fucking sponsor. I'd paid every penny of her tuition for 3 years. I'd covered her rent, her car payments, her shopping sprees, her girls' trips to Miami and Napa Valley. I'd been her walking ATM for our entire relationship, and she was thanking Dominic for sponsoring her through law school, the guy who'd probably never paid for anything more expensive than her Starbucks order. My grip on the phone tightened until I could hear the case creaking. The blood was rushing in my ears, and for a second I thought I might actually pass out right there on the sidewalk. This wasn't just betrayal. This was humiliation served ice cold with a side of public embarrassment. Everyone who mattered to her had been at that party. Her law school friends, her colleagues, probably half the legal community in Manhattan. And they all thought Dominic was her sugar daddy. The comments were already rolling in. Heart eye emojis, congratulations, people tagging their friends to come see the gorgeous couple. One comment made my stomach drop even further. Finally, we were wondering when you two would make it official. You're perfect together. Finally, they've been wondering? How long had this been going on? I scrolled through more photos from the party. There was Leah giving her speech, the speech I'd helped her write, by the way, thanking everyone for their support. There was the cake-cutting ceremony with that ridiculously expensive custom cake I'd ordered from that fancy bakery in Brooklyn. There were group shots of her law school friends, candid photos of the jazz trio playing, pictures of people dancing and laughing and having the time of their lives. At my expense, literally. And in every single photo where couples appeared, there was Leah with Dominic. His arm around her waist, her hand on his chest, both of them looking like they'd stepped out of some romantic movie about successful young lawyers falling in love over case files and late-night coffee runs. I turned away from the locked venue without another word. There was nothing left to say, nothing left to see. The party was over, in more ways than one. Walking back to my car, I felt something shift inside me. The hurt was still there, raw and burning, but underneath it was something colder. Something calculating. Leah thought she was so clever, pulling off this little switcheroo. She thought she could just erase me from her success story and replace me with her new boyfriend like I was some inconvenient footnote in her biography. But here's what my dear wife didn't know, and what was about to become very, very important. I don't just throw money around randomly. Every dollar I spend, every investment I make, every financial decision that affects my life gets documented, tracked, and recorded with the precision of a Swiss watchmaker. And Dominic Kane? Well, let's just say that our connection ran a lot deeper than Leah realized. The drive back to my apartment was a blur of red lights and rage-induced tunnel vision. I barely remember navigating through Manhattan traffic, which is saying something, because usually driving in this city requires the focus of a neurosurgeon and the patience of a monk. But tonight, I could have been driving blindfolded through a demolition derby, and I wouldn't have noticed. My building's doorman, Carlos, gave me his usual friendly wave, but I could see the concern creep across his face when he got a good look at me. Evening, Mr. Thompson. Everything all right? Just peachy, Carlos. Living the dream. My voice came out flat, emotionless. Even I could hear how dead I sounded. The elevator ride to the 30th floor felt like it took forever. I caught my reflection in the polished steel doors and almost didn't recognize myself. My usually perfect hair was disheveled from running my hands through it. My tie was crooked, and my eyes had this hollow look that reminded me of those shell-shocked soldiers you see in war documentaries. But as soon as I walked through my front door and saw my apartment, my asterisk apartment, the one I'd bought and paid for and decorated according to my own damn taste, something inside me started to solidify. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The place was exactly as I'd left it this morning. Immaculate, organized, and completely under my control. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a breathtaking view of Central Park, where the city lights twinkled like expensive jewelry scattered across black velvet. The modern furniture was all clean lines and quality materials. None of that fussy antique stuff Leah had been pushing for. It would add character, she'd said. Yeah, well, turns out she was the one lacking character. I poured myself 3 fingers of Macallan 25, the good stuff I usually save for closing major deals, and headed straight for my home office. This room was my sanctuary, my fortress of solitude, my command center. Everything in here was exactly where it should be, arranged with the kind of obsessive precision that had made me successful in the first place. The desk was a thing of beauty, reclaimed walnut from some 19th century barn in Vermont, custom built by a guy in Brooklyn who charged more per square foot than most Manhattan apartments. My laptop sat open in the exact center, flanked by two matching monitors and a sound system that cost more than most people's cars. The bookshelf held my collection of business biographies, investment guides, and legal texts that I actually read, unlike some people who just posed with them for Instagram photos. But the real star of the show was sitting in the bottom drawer of my desk, locked away like the precious thing it was, my black leather primary assets binder. I pulled it out and set it on the desk with the reverence usually reserved for religious artifacts. This baby contained 3 years of meticulous record-keeping, every transaction documented with obsessive detail. Bank statements, wire transfer receipts, tuition invoices, rent payments, credit card statements, a complete financial autobiography of my relationship with Leah. See, here's the thing about me that Leah never quite understood. I don't do anything halfway. When I love someone, I love them completely, totally, with every fiber of my being. And when I support someone financially, I document every goddamn penny because that's what smart businessmen do. You keep records. You cover your ass. You make sure you can prove exactly what happened if things go sideways. And boy, had things gone sideways tonight. I opened the binder and started flipping through the pages, each one a reminder of just how generous I'd been. Law school tuition, $180,000 over 3 years, not including books, supplies, and all those study abroad programs she just had to attend. Monthly rent for her apartment in the village, $4,200 for 36 months. Car payments on that BMW she'd claimed was essential for networking, another $800 monthly. Shopping allowances, vacation expenses, restaurant bills that could feed a small village in most countries. The numbers were staggering, even to me. I'd been Leah's personal Bank of America, dispensing cash with the generosity of a drunken lottery winner. And she'd repaid me by making out with her boss at a party I'd funded, then publicly crediting him as her sponsor. But here's where it gets interesting, and where Leah's complete ignorance of my business dealings was about to bite her in her perfectly sculpted ass. About 18 months ago, she'd come to me with this sob story about Dominic. Poor guy was struggling to get his legal consulting firm off the ground. He had big dreams, but no capital. His family had cut him off financially after some falling out over his career choices. He was brilliant, according to Leah, but just needed someone to believe in him. "Baby, you're so good at seeing potential in people," she'd said, curled up next to me on this very couch. "Dominic has this amazing vision for revolutionizing corporate legal services. He just needs someone with your business sense to help make it happen." She'd batted those long eyelashes and given me that smile that used to make my knees weak. "Maybe you could meet with him? Just coffee, nothing major. I think you two would really click." So I'd met with Dominic. And you know what? The guy actually was brilliant. His business plan was solid, his market analysis was spot on, and his projections were realistic. Kane Dynamics had real potential to disrupt the traditional corporate law model. The problem was, he needed serious capital to make it happen. Way more than a simple loan or investment from friends and family. That's when I'd made my move. I'd offered to fund Kane Dynamics completely. Full startup capital, operational expenses, office space, employee salaries, marketing budget, the whole 9 yards. In exchange, I wanted 90% ownership of the company. Dominic would retain 10% and serve as CEO, but I would be the majority shareholder with full voting control. It was a fair deal, more than fair, actually. Most venture capitalists would have demanded 95% for that level of investment. But I'd liked the guy, and more importantly, I'd wanted to make Leah happy by helping her friend. The paperwork was airtight, drawn up by the best corporate lawyers money could buy. Dominic had signed everything without hesitation, probably because he was so grateful to finally have someone take him seriously. And just like that, I'd become the silent owner of what was now a $157 million company. Kane Dynamics had taken off like a rocket over the past year and a half. They'd landed major contracts with Fortune 500 companies, opened offices in 3 cities, and were being courted by several private equity firms for acquisition. The business press was calling Dominic a legal visionary and a disruptive force in corporate consulting. What they didn't know, what nobody knew except me, Dominic, and our lawyers, was that Dominic Kane was essentially a very well-paid employee of mine. He ran the day-to-day operations, made strategic decisions, and got all the public credit. But at the end of the day, I owned that company lock, stock, and barrel. And now, sitting in my office with that Instagram photo burned into my retinas, I realized I had something much better than hurt feelings. I had leverage. I opened my laptop and navigated to the private equity exchange where Kane Dynamics shares could be traded among qualified investors. The current market value, $174.4 million. My 90% stake, worth approximately $157 million. Give or take a few million depending on market fluctuations. There were already 3 serious acquisition offers pending in my inbox. 2 private equity firms and 1 major consulting conglomerate, all offering premium prices for immediate sale. I could liquidate my entire position tonight if I wanted to. Just click a few buttons and walk away with enough money to buy a small island somewhere. The irony was almost too perfect. Leah thought she was so clever, crediting Dominic as her sponsor in that Instagram post. She had no idea that her precious Dominic was essentially my employee, that his entire success story was built on my investment, that his brilliant legal mind was only able to flourish because I'd given him the financial foundation to do it. I leaned back in my chair and took another sip of whiskey. The burn felt good, clarifying. For the first time since I'd seen that locked venue door, I was starting to feel like myself again. Not the hurt, betrayed husband who'd been made a fool of in front of half of Manhattan's legal community, but the calculating businessman who'd built his own fortune by staying 3 steps ahead of everyone else. Leah wanted to play games. She wanted to rewrite history and pretend I'd never existed. She wanted to humiliate me publicly while building her new romance on the foundation I'd provided. Fine. Game on. But this was going to be played by my rules now. You know that feeling when you're standing at the edge of a cliff, and there's this moment where you could either step back to safety or take the leap into the unknown. That's exactly where I was sitting at 2:47 a.m., staring at my laptop screen with the cursor hovering over buttons that would change everything. The Macallan had done its job. The sharp edges of my anger had smoothed into something much more dangerous. Cold, calculated fury. I'd spent the last 4 hours going through every financial connection I had to Leah's perfect little life. And let me tell you, the web was more extensive than a conspiracy theorist's corkboard. But I'm a methodical guy. You don't build a multi-million-dollar portfolio by making rash decisions, even when your cheating wife has just served your dignity on a silver platter to half of Manhattan's legal elite. So I started small, with the arteries that fed her lifestyle before moving on to the major organs. First up, the graduation party vendors. My fingers flew across the keyboard as I logged into my business banking portal. The venue payment? Canceled, with a dispute filed citing services not rendered as agreed. The catering company? Same treatment. The jazz trio she'd handpicked? Their check was getting stopped faster than a teenager trying to use a fake ID at a liquor store. Now, technically, the services had been rendered, just not to me, since I'd apparently been persona non grata at my own wife's celebration. But that's the beautiful thing about contract law. There's always an out if you know where to look. The venue contract specifically stated that the event was for Mr. and Mrs. Thompson's celebration, and since Mr. Thompson hadn't been invited, the terms had been materially breached. I could practically hear the phone calls that would be happening in a few hours. Venue managers scrambling to explain to their bosses why they'd hosted a party without getting paid. Caterers wondering how they were going to explain the bounced check to their suppliers. The jazz trio probably wouldn't even notice until they tried to deposit their payment next week. But when they did, it was going to be a fun conversation. Next on the chopping block, Leah's corporate American Express card. This one was particularly satisfying because I'd set it up as an authorized user account under my primary business credit line. The monthly limit was $15,000, which she routinely maxed out on everything from designer shoes to those ridiculous $200 facials she claimed were essential for professional networking. With a few C, her Uber account was linked to that card. Her seamless orders, her Amazon Prime shopping sprees, her monthly subscription to that boutique gym in Soho where she did more socializing than working out. All of it was about to come to a screeching halt the next time she tried to make a purchase. Then came the big one, her final semester tuition reimbursement. See, here's something most people don't know about law school financing. A lot of students pay their final semester tuition up front and then apply for various reimbursements and grants after graduation. It's like getting a tax refund, except the check is usually around $35,000 and it comes from the school's financial aid office rather than the IRS. Leah's reimbursement had been processed yesterday. I'd gotten the notification email while I was driving to the party venue. $37,000 for $112, direct deposited into the joint checking account I'd set up for her education expenses. The same account where I was listed as the primary holder. I transferred every penny back to my personal account and then closed the joint account entirely. The transaction history would show exactly what had happened, but by the time Leah figured it out, the money would be long gone and the account would be a memory. But that was all just foreplay. The main event was Kane Dynamics. I pulled up the private equity exchange again and stared at the numbers. The company I'd built, because let's be honest, that's exactly what I'd done, was valued at $174.4 million as of market close. My 90% stake was worth more than some small country's GDP. And sitting in my inbox were 3 acquisition offers that would turn my investment into enough cash to retire tomorrow if I wanted to. The first offer was from Meridian Capital, a Boston-based private equity firm that specialized in legal service acquisitions. They were offering $180 million for a complete buyout, which represented a 3.2% premium over current market value. Not bad, but not spectacular. The second offer came from Goldman Sachs' private wealth division, representing an unnamed client who wanted to acquire Kane Dynamics as part of a larger legal services consolidation play. Their offer was $185 million, plus a potential earn-out clause that could push the total to $200 million if certain performance metrics were met over the next 2 years. But the third offer, that was the one that made me smile for the first time all night. Blackstone Legal Partners, the same firm that had been trying to poach Dominic for the past 6 months, was offering $195 million for an immediate acquisition, with the stipulation that all current management would be retained for a minimum of 2 years. They wanted to buy Kane Dynamics specifically to get Dominic, not realizing that Dominic was essentially just an expensive employee who could be replaced at my whim. The irony was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Blackstone was willing to pay nearly $200 million to acquire a company just to get their hands on a guy who was about to find out that his entire career was built on borrowed time and my generosity. I opened a new browser tab and navigated to the secure transaction portal. My fingers hovered over the keyboard as I considered my options. I could accept the Blackstone offer and walk away with enough money to never work again. Or I could accept one of the other offers and watch Dominic's world crumble when his new corporate overlords decided they didn't need his services after all. But then I remembered that Instagram photo. Leah's lips on his, her hand on his chest, that caption thanking him for being her sponsor through law school. I remembered the comments from their mutual friends. All those people who thought they'd been watching some beautiful love story unfold when they were actually witnessing the most expensive cuckold arrangement in Manhattan's history. Fuck it. I clicked on the Blackstone offer and hit accept terms. The transaction would take 48 hours to fully process, but my shares were now locked in at $195 million. By Monday morning, I would no longer own Kane Dynamics, and Dominic would be working for people who'd paid a premium price for a company they thought he controlled. The beautiful part was that Dominic would probably never know what hit him. He'd wake up Monday morning thinking he was still the visionary CEO of his successful consulting firm. He'd grab his usual coffee from that pretentious place on the corner, check his stock options portfolio, and probably text Leah some cute message about their bright future together. Instead, he'd walk into his office to find representatives from Blackstone waiting to explain the new corporate structure. They'd be polite about it, professional, but the message would be clear. Kane Dynamics was under new management, and Dominic's role was about to be evaluated for optimal strategic fit. In corporate speak, that translates to, "We paid $195 million for your company because we thought you were indispensable, but now that we own you, we're going to figure out whether you're actually worth keeping around." My laptop chimed with a confirmation email. Transaction accepted. Funds would be available for transfer within 2 business days. I was now $195 million richer, and the company that had made Dominic into Leah's knight in shining armor was about to become someone else's problem. I leaned back in my chair and finished the last of my whiskey. The city lights twinkled outside my window, and for the first time since I'd stood outside that locked venue door, I felt like I was back in control. Phase 1 was complete. The financial arteries that had kept Leah's lifestyle flowing were now severed, and Dominic's professional world was about to be turned upside down. But this was just the beginning. Tomorrow, the real consequences would start hitting, and I had a front row seat to watch it all unfold. I woke up at 6:30 a.m. to the sound of my phone buzzing like an angry hornet trapped in a mason jar. Even in my half-asleep state, I knew exactly what was happening. The chickens were coming home to roost, and apparently they were pissed off about the accommodations. My phone screen looked like Times Square on New Year's Eve, notification after notification lighting up the display. Text messages, missed calls, voicemails, even a few WhatsApp messages from numbers I didn't recognize. The digital equivalent of pitchforks and torches, all demanding my immediate attention. I made myself a cup of coffee first, because I'm not a savage. Ethiopian single origin, ground fresh, brewed in my $3,000 espresso machine that Leah had called ridiculously overpriced when I'd bought it. Funny how everything I enjoyed was either overpriced or unnecessary, according to her, but her monthly shopping sprees were essential investments in her professional image. The coffee was perfect, rich, smooth, with just enough caffeine to prepare me for whatever shitstorm was waiting in my inbox. I settled into my favorite armchair, the one with the perfect view of Central Park, and finally checked my phone. 156 missed calls. 156. I hadn't seen numbers like that since the 2008 financial crisis, when half my clients were calling to either panic sell everything or beg me to perform some kind of investment miracle that would save their retirement funds. The text messages were even better. A beautiful cascade of desperation, confusion, and barely contained panic that read like a master class in Actions Have Consequences 101. Leah had sent 47 messages between 3 a.m. and 6 a.m. They started out confused. Babe, my card got declined at the pharmacy. Can you check on that? Progressed through anger. This is ridiculous. I need my medications and my card isn't working. And ended up in full-blown panic mode. Call me back right now. Something is seriously wrong with all my accounts and I need you to fix this immediately. The progression was beautiful to watch. You could practically see the exact moment when she realized this wasn't some computer glitch or banking error. The timestamp on message 32 was 4:47 a.m., probably right around when she called her bank and discovered that her account had been closed by the primary account holder. That would be me, in case anyone was keeping score. Dominic's messages were more professional, but equally frantic. As a lawyer, he at least understood the concept of documentation, so his texts read like evidence for a future court case. Michael, there seems to be an issue with Kane Dynamics operational accounts. Please call me at your earliest convenience to discuss. Then, 2 hours later, Michael, this is urgent. Our payroll system is showing errors and several vendors are reporting payment issues. We need to resolve this immediately. But the real entertainment was in the voicemails. I grabbed a fresh cup of coffee and settled in for what I knew was going to be better than anything Netflix had to offer. Voicemail number 12 was from the venue coordinator, her voice tight with professional panic. Mr. Thompson, this is Sandra from the Crystal Ballroom. We need to discuss the payment reversal that occurred overnight. Our accounting department is showing a significant discrepancy, and we have vendors asking questions about their payments. Please call me back as soon as possible. Voicemail 23 was from Dominic's CFO, a guy named Bradley who sounded like he'd been chain-smoking since dawn. Mr. Thompson, this is Brad Henley from Kane Dynamics. We've got a serious problem with our operating capital, and Dominic mentioned you might be able to help clarify some banking issues. The board is meeting in emergency session, and we really need to get this sorted out before market open. Emergency session. I loved it. Nothing says your life is about to change dramatically like an emergency board meeting on a Saturday morning. But voicemail 38 was the crown jewel. Leah's voice, completely unhinged. You son of a bitch. I know you're doing this on purpose. You can't just steal my money because your feelings got hurt. I have bills to pay and a life to live, and you don't get to just destroy everything because you're having some kind of midlife crisis. Call me back right fucking now, or I swear to God I'll. The message cut off there, probably because she'd exceeded the time limit. Midlife crisis. That's what she was calling it. Like my perfectly reasonable response to being publicly humiliated and financially cuckolded was some kind of mental health episode that required her patience and understanding. I was on voicemail 45 when the doorbell rang. Carlos must have called up from the lobby, but I'd been too entertained by the digital meltdown to answer my landline. I walked to the front door and checked the peephole, expecting to see Leah standing there with that "we need to talk" expression that had preceded every major argument of our marriage. Instead, it was Maya Torres, Leah's personal assistant. Poor Maya looked like she'd been through a blender set on emotional devastation. Her usually perfect hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail. She was wearing yesterday's clothes, and she was clutching her phone like it was the only thing keeping her tethered to reality. I opened the door and leaned against the frame, coffee mug in hand. "Maya, this is unexpected. Don't you usually work banker's hours?" "Mr. Thompson, I'm so sorry to bother you this early, but..." She paused, looking around like she was afraid someone might be watching. "Can I come in? There's a situation." I stepped aside and gestured for her to enter. Maya had always been efficient, professional, and refreshingly honest about Leah's more unreasonable demands. If anyone deserved to be caught in the crossfire of my marital nuclear war, it wasn't her. She followed me into the living room, declining my offer of coffee with a shaky wave of her hand. "I don't even know where to start," she said, sinking into the couch like a deflated balloon. "Everything's falling apart." "Define everything," I said, settling back into my chair with the casual interest of someone watching a nature documentary about predators. The graduation after-party got shut down halfway through last night because the venue's check bounced. People were still dancing when security came in and told everyone they had to leave. Leah was mortified. I mean, absolutely mortified. Some of the partners from her firm were there, and they had to watch her get escorted out by building security. I nodded sympathetically while internally doing a victory dance. "That does sound embarrassing. But that's not even the worst part," Maya continued, her voice rising with each word. "This morning, Kane Dynamics' payroll system crashed. Completely crashed. Nobody got their direct deposits. The accounting software is showing error messages, and half the staff can't access their company credit cards." "Sounds like a technical issue," I said, taking another sip of coffee. "Mr. Thompson," Maya said, looking at me with the kind of expression usually reserved for explaining simple concepts to small children. "Dominic's board is in emergency session. They're talking about bringing in external auditors. There are rumors flying that the company might be facing some kind of hostile takeover or financial investigation." I raised an eyebrow. "That's quite a leap from a payroll glitch." "And Leah?" Maya's voice dropped to almost a whisper. "Leah's losing it. Completely losing it. Her bank accounts are frozen, her credit cards aren't working, and she can't reach you. She's been calling everyone she knows trying to figure out what's happening, but nobody has any answers." She pulled out her phone and showed me the screen. 17 missed calls from Leah in the past hour alone. "She sent me here to find you," Maya said. She's scared, Mr. Thompson. Really scared. She keeps saying that something terrible has happened and that you're the only one who can fix it." I set down my coffee mug and looked at Maya with what I hoped was an expression of mild concern mixed with complete innocence. "Well, Maya, that does sound like quite a predicament. So you'll help?" The relief in her voice was almost heartbreaking. "Help with what exactly?" I asked. "I'm just a guy who woke up to 156 missed calls on a Saturday morning. Sounds like Leah and her boyfriend are having some business troubles that have nothing to do with me." Maya stared at me for a long moment, and I could practically see the pieces clicking into place behind her eyes. She was smart enough to recognize the careful neutrality in my tone, experienced enough with wealthy clients to understand when someone was being deliberately obtuse. "This isn't a coincidence, is it?" she said quietly. "Maya," I said, standing up and walking toward the front door, "I think you should probably get back to work. Sounds like your boss is going to need all the help she can get today." After Maya left looking like someone had just explained quantum physics to her using interpretive dance, I poured myself another cup of coffee and settled in at my desk. The morning entertainment had been delicious, but now it was time to get down to business. Real business. the kind that required letterhead, legal precision, and the sort of terms that would make corporate lawyers weep with admiration. I pulled out a sheet of my personal stationery, heavy cream paper with my name embossed in dark blue ink, the kind of formal correspondence that screams, "This person means business," before you even read the first word. Some people might call it pretentious. I called it setting the proper tone for negotiations. The funny thing about ultimatums is that most people deliver them wrong. They get emotional, start yelling, make threats they can't back up. But a truly effective ultimatum should read like a business contract, because that's exactly what it is. A contract where one party holds all the cards and the other party gets to choose between accepting terrible terms or facing even worse consequences. I cracked my knuckles and started typing. After 15 years of drafting investment agreements and acquisition terms, I knew exactly how to structure this particular document. 2. Leah Thompson and Dominic Kane. From Michael Thompson. Re. Terms for resolution of current financial disruptions. Date. Today's date. The undersigned acknowledges that recent financial irregularities have created inconveniences for both parties named above. In the interest of resolving these matters expeditiously and avoiding further complications, the following terms are hereby proposed. I pause to admire my opening paragraph. Dry, businesslike, completely devoid of emotional content. Nothing in those sentences even hinted at betrayal, humiliation, or the fact that my wife had been playing tonsil hockey with her boss at a party I'd funded. Just financial irregularities and inconveniences. Like their entire world wasn't currently imploding because I'd decided to stop being their personal ATM. Term 1. Public acknowledgement. Mrs. Leah Thompson shall issue a public statement to be posted across all personal social media platforms and submitted to relevant legal industry publications, acknowledging that her law school education was funded entirely by Michael Thompson. This statement shall specifically name Michael Thompson as the sole financial backer of her legal education and shall correct any previous public statements suggesting alternative sources of funding. The statement shall be substantively identical to the draft provided as Attachment A to this document. I opened a new document and started drafting Attachment A. This was going to be fun. Statement of correction. I want to publicly acknowledge and thank my husband, Michael Thompson, for his complete financial support throughout my law school journey. Michael paid for my tuition, living expenses, and educational costs without any assistance from other parties. My recent social media posts incorrectly suggested that others had sponsored my education, and I apologize for any confusion this may have caused. Michael's generous support made my legal career possible, and I am grateful for his investment in my future. Short, sweet, and completely humiliating for someone who'd just spent the last 6 months telling everyone that Dominic was her mentor and inspiration. The legal community loved gossip more than reality TV stars love plastic surgery, so this little correction would be making the rounds at every bar association happy hour for months. Back to the main document. Term 2. Executive resignation. Mr. Dominic Kane shall submit his resignation from all positions at Kane Dynamics, effective immediately upon execution of this agreement. Mr. Kane shall waive any claims to severance, stock options, or other compensation beyond salary earned through his final day of employment. Mr. Kane shall cooperate fully with transition activities as directed by the company's new ownership structure. I allowed myself a small smile at that last bit. Dominic would probably spend hours trying to figure out what new ownership structure meant. By the time he figured it out, he'd be updating his LinkedIn profile with seeking new opportunities in legal consulting. Term 3. Marital asset protection. Mrs. Leah Thompson hereby waives any claims to marital property, business interests, or other assets acquired during the marriage by Michael Thompson. This includes, but is not limited to, investment portfolios, real estate holdings, BU, business equity, and intellectual property. Mrs. Thompson acknowledges that these assets represent Michael Thompson's separate property and shall make no claims for division, support, or compensation related to these holdings. This was the big one. Under New York's equitable distribution laws, Leah could theoretically claim half of everything I'd acquired during our marriage. But that was only if she wanted to drag things through divorce court while I systematically dismantled every financial structure that supported her lifestyle. The smart play was to waive her claims now and avoid the scorched earth litigation that would leave us both poorer and angrier. Term 4. Non-disclosure agreement. Both parties shall execute comprehensive non-disclosure agreements prohibiting public discussion of Michael Thompson's business activities, investment decisions, or personal affairs. This includes, but is not limited to, social media posts, interviews, casual conversations with third parties, and any other forms of public or private communication that reference Michael Thompson in any context. I wanted them both to disappear from my life completely. No more Instagram posts tagging me in couple photos. No more casual mentions at networking events. No more, "Oh, Michael thinks this," or "Michael suggested that," in their professional conversations. They could go build their new life together, but they'd be doing it without using my name as their social currency. Term 5. Enforcement and consequences. Any violation of these terms shall result in immediate legal action seeking full monetary damages, injunctive relief, and complete asset clawback of all funds previously provided to either party. Michael Thompson reserves the right to pursue all available legal remedies, including but not limited to civil litigation, asset forfeiture proceedings, and criminal referrals where applicable. The stick to go with the carrot, in other words. Play by my rules, or I'd spend the next 5 years and a significant portion of my considerable wealth making their lives a legal nightmare that would make Dante's Inferno look like a spa vacation. I printed the document on my personal letterhead, then printed a second copy for my records. The terms were harsh but fair, or at least, they were as fair as I was feeling toward a cheating wife and her boyfriend who'd been living off my generosity while planning their romantic future together. The beauty of this approach was its simplicity. Leah and Dominic could sign the papers and move on with their lives, or they could refuse and watch as their current financial catastrophe became a permanent state of affairs. I wasn't asking for anything unreasonable, just public acknowledgement of reality, professional consequences for Dominic's poor judgment, and legal protection for my own assets. I folded the documents carefully and placed them in a manila envelope along with a cover letter explaining that they had 24 hours to respond. Not to negotiate, not to propose counteroffers, but to respond with either signed agreements or a clear indication that they preferred to handle this matter through alternative means. Alternative means, in this context, being the legal equivalent of a nuclear winter that would leave both of them professionally and financially radioactive for years to come. Maya was probably still somewhere in the building, either hiding in the lobby or pacing around outside, trying to figure out how to report back to Leah without becoming the messenger who gets shot. I called down to Carlos and asked him to find her and have her come back up. She knocked on my door 15 minutes later, looking even more frazzled than when she'd left. "Mr. Thompson? Carlos said you wanted to see me again." I handed her the envelope. "I need you to deliver this to Leah in person. Not by email, not by text, not left with a doorman or assistant. Hand-delivered, with confirmation that she's read and understood the contents." Maya took the envelope like it might explode in her hands. "What is it?" "A solution to her current problems," I said, "along with some very reasonable terms for resolving this situation. She has 24 hours to respond. And if she doesn't respond?" I smiled the kind of smile that venture capitalists use when explaining to startup founders why their company is being dissolved. "Then she'll discover that her current problems were just the opening act. The main show hasn't even started yet." I spent the rest of Saturday doing exactly what I'd been planning to do before my life imploded on Friday night. Absolutely nothing productive. I ordered Thai food from that place on the Upper West Side that charges $40 for pad Thai, but makes it so good you'd sell your grandmother's jewelry to get another order. I binge-watched the entire second season of some Netflix show about billionaires behaving badly, which, given my current circumstances, felt like a documentary about my weekend. Around 7 p.m., I opened a bottle of Barolo that I'd been saving for a special occasion. Originally, I'd thought that special occasion might be Leah's first big case win, or maybe a romantic anniversary dinner. Turns out the special occasion was celebrating the systematic destruction of my cheating wife's financial security. Life's funny like that. The wine was perfect, rich, complex, with just enough tannins to remind you that good things take time to develop properly. Unlike marriages, apparently, which could go from "till death do us part" to "I guess I didn't want you there" faster than a tech startup burning through venture capital. My phone had been mercifully quiet since Maya left with the envelope. Either Leah was taking her time reading my terms, or she was holed up somewhere having the kind of emotional breakdown that requires multiple boxes of tissues and at least one friend willing to listen to 3 hours of, but I don't understand how this happened, on repeat. I was halfway through the bottle and contemplating whether to order dessert from that overpriced gelato place when my building's front desk called. "Mr. Thompson? There's a Mrs. Thompson here to see you. Should I send her up?" Of course there was. I'd been wondering when she'd finally work up the courage to face me directly instead of sending her assistant to do reconnaissance missions. "Send her up, Carlos." "Thanks." I didn't bother changing clothes or tidying up the apartment. If Leah wanted to have this conversation, we were going to have it on my terms, in my space, with me holding all the cards. Besides, she'd seen me in sweatpants and a Harvard Business School t-shirt before. Though admittedly, those previous occasions hadn't involved me systematically dismantling her entire financial support structure. The knock on my door came exactly 4 minutes later, just enough time for the elevator ride, and a brief moment of hesitation in the hallway while she worked up her nerve. I opened the door and got my first look at my wife since she'd decided to credit her boyfriend as her law school sponsor. She looked like absolute hell. Her usually perfect hair was hanging loose and unwashed, with the kind of greasy limpness that comes from spending too much time lying in bed staring at the ceiling. The designer makeup she never left the apartment without was completely absent, leaving her face pale and puffy around the eyes. She was still wearing yesterday's clothes. That same champagne gold dress from the Instagram photo, except now it was wrinkled and stained with what looked like coffee or wine or possibly tears. "Can I come in?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I stepped aside without saying anything. What was there to say? "Welcome to the consequences of your actions. Gee, you look like someone who just discovered that financial security isn't guaranteed. Sometimes silence is more devastating than any clever comeback." She walked into the living room like someone navigating a minefield, glancing around at the apartment she'd lived in for 3 years as if she'd never seen it before. Maybe she was finally noticing that every piece of furniture, every piece of art, every expensive gadget had been bought with my money. Or maybe she was just trying to figure out how to start a conversation with the husband she'd publicly humiliated less than 24 hours ago. "I got your document," she said, sinking onto the couch where she'd cuddled with me countless times while planning our future together. Back when I'd thought our future involved growing old together instead of growing apart via Instagram posts. "I figured you had, considering you're here instead of at Dominic's place." I stayed standing, leaning against the window with my wine glass. Power dynamics matter in negotiations, and I wanted her looking up at me for this conversation. "Michael, I need you to understand something." She was using her lawyer voice, the calm, reasonable tone she'd practiced for closing arguments and client meetings. "What happened at the party? It wasn't supposed to hurt you." I nearly choked on my wine. "It wasn't supposed to hurt me? You threw a graduation party that I paid for, didn't invite me, made out with your boss in front of everyone we know, and then publicly credited him for funding your education. But somehow this wasn't supposed to hurt me. She paused, running her hands through her unwashed hair. "I didn't want you there with my friends." "Your friends." I repeated the words like I was trying to understand a foreign language. "The same friends who've been eating at restaurants I paid for, drinking wine I bought, celebrating your accomplishments that I funded?" "It's not like that." "Then explain to me what it is like, Leah. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you've been running a 3-year con where you let me pay for your entire life while you planned your exit strategy with Dominic." She stood up abruptly, pacing toward the kitchen like a caged animal. "You don't understand the pressure I was under. Do you know what it's like being the wife who can't afford anything on her own? Having everyone know that my husband pays for everything? So your solution was to pretend that your boyfriend pays for everything instead?" "He's not my boyfriend." The words came out sharp and defensive. "Dominic and I. It's complicated." I laughed, and even I could hear how cold it sounded. "Complicated. Right. That's what we're calling it when you stick your tongue down someone's throat at a party and thank them for sponsoring your education." She stopped pacing and turned to face me. "I made a mistake, okay? I got caught up in the moment, and I said something stupid on Instagram. But that doesn't mean you get to destroy my entire life." "Destroy your life?" I set down my wine glass and walked toward her. "Leah, I didn't destroy anything. I just stopped paying for it." There's a difference. You cancel my credit cards. You close my bank accounts. She gestured wildly around the apartment. You've turned off everything. I can't even buy groceries. Welcome to adulthood, I said. Most people actually have to earn money before they can spend it. Revolutionary concept, I know. Her face crumpled, and for a moment I saw a flash of the woman I'd fallen in love with 4 years ago. Vulnerable, uncertain, human. Then she straightened up, and the lawyer mask slipped back into place. Those terms you sent me, she said. They're ridiculous. You can't expect me to publicly humiliate myself just because you're having some kind of what? I interrupted. Some kind of reasonable response to being betrayed and humiliated? Some kind of natural reaction to discovering that my wife has been planning her future with another man while I pay all the bills. I never planned anything with Dominic. Really? Because that Instagram post sure made it sound like you two have been quite the team. Couldn't have done it without you, my sponsor through law school. Heart emoji. Pretty clear messaging there, counselor. She was crying now, ugly tears that streaked down her cheeks and dripped onto that champagne gold dress. I felt overshadowed by you. Like I couldn't have any success that was really mine. Like everything I accomplished was just because of your money. And so you decided to give the credit to Dominic instead. I didn't mean for it to happen like this. But it did happen like this. I walked back to the window, looking out at the city lights that sparkled like scattered diamonds. You made choices, Leah. You chose not to invite me to your party. You chose to kiss Dominic in front of everyone. You chose to thank him publicly for something I paid for. And now you get to live with the consequences of those choices. She followed me to the window, standing close enough that I could smell her perfume mixed with the scent of desperation and regret. Michael, please. I know I screwed up, but we can fix this. We can go to counseling. We can work through this together. You don't have to burn everything down. I turned to look at her, this woman I'd loved enough to support completely, to invest in totally, to trust with my heart and my wallet. Those terms in the envelope aren't negotiable, Leah. You sign them, or you learn what life looks like when I'm not subsidizing it. And if I sign them, what then? Then you and Dominic can build whatever life you want together. Just not with my money, and not with my name attached to your success story. She stared at me for a long moment, probably trying to figure out if I was bluffing. I wasn't. The old Michael, the one who'd believed in love and partnership and building a life together, had died somewhere between that locked venue door and that Instagram post. The new Michael was a businessman first, and businessmen don't make deals with people who've already proven they can't be trusted. 24 hours, I said quietly. Sign the papers, or find out what the alternative looks like. Monday morning arrived with the kind of crisp autumn air that makes Manhattan feel like the center of the universe. I chose my outfit carefully, navy Tom Ford suit, Italian leather shoes that cost more than most people's rent, and a tie that whispered, I own this room, without having to shout about it. Today wasn't just about business. It was about making a statement that would echo through the financial district for months. The Kane Dynamics building on Park Avenue was one of those gleaming glass towers that screamed, "We've made it," to anyone walking by. 47 stories of steel and ambition, with Dominic's company occupying the entire 32nd floor. I'd been here exactly once before, about 6 months ago, when Dominic had insisted on giving me a tour of our expanding empire. Our empire. If he only knew. I walked through the lobby like I owned the place, which, until about 18 hours ago, I basically did. The security guard recognized me and waved me through without the usual visitor badge nonsense. Poor guy probably had no idea that the friendly investor he'd been greeting for the past year and a half had just sold the company out from under everyone's feet. The elevator ride to the 32nd floor gave me time to appreciate the irony of the situation. When I'd first invested in Kane Dynamics, Dominic had been working out of a WeWork space in Brooklyn, sharing a conference room with a startup that made artisanal dog treats and another company that was trying to revolutionize the sock industry. Now he had a corner office with floor-to-ceiling windows and a view that probably cost more per square foot than some people's entire apartments. All thanks to my money. All about to become someone else's problem. The reception area was buzzing with the kind of nervous energy that happens when rumors start flying and nobody knows which way the wind is blowing. I could see clusters of employees having hushed conversations by the coffee machine, and at least 3 people were frantically typing on their phones like they were texting their resumes to headhunters. Mr. Thompson, the receptionist, a young woman named Jessica who'd always been unfailingly polite, looked relieved to see me. Thank goodness you're here. Mr. Kane has been trying to reach you all weekend. I'm sure he has, I said, checking my watch. Is the board meeting still happening? Yes, sir. Conference room A. They've been in there since 7 this morning. 7 a.m. on a Monday. That was desperation time. The kind of early meeting that happened when shit had hit the fan and everyone was scrambling to figure out which direction the pieces were flying. I walked down the hallway toward the conference room, passing offices where Kane Dynamics rising stars were probably wondering if they'd still have jobs by lunch. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was about to attend a board meeting for a company I no longer owned, to discuss problems I created, with people who had no idea I was the source of their current nightmare. The conference room had glass walls, so I could see the meeting in progress before I even opened the door. 7 people around a mahogany table that cost more than most cars, all looking like they'd been hit by a freight train carrying bad news. Financial documents were scattered across the table, laptops were open showing spreadsheets that probably looked like crime scenes, and everyone had that shell-shocked expression that comes with realizing your professional world is imploding in real time. Notably absent, Dominic Kane. I knocked once and opened the door. The conversation stopped immediately, and 7 pairs of eyes turned toward me with the kind of desperate hope usually reserved for disaster movie scenes where the cavalry arrives just in time. Michael. Brad Henley, the CFO, practically jumped out of his chair. Thank God you're here. We've been trying to reach you all weekend. So I heard, I said, taking the empty seat at the head of the table. It was Dominic's usual spot, but since Dominic wasn't here, I figured someone should fill the leadership vacuum. Where's our fearless CEO? The board members exchanged glances like they were trying to decide who had to deliver the bad news. Finally, Sarah Chun, the head of operations, cleared her throat. Dominic's no longer with the company as of this morning. Resignation? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Security escorted him out about an hour ago, Brad said. He submitted his resignation via email at 6:47 a.m. Very brief, very professional, but he's gone. I nodded like this was surprising news instead of the exact outcome I'd orchestrated. That's unfortunate timing, given our current challenges. Michael, Sarah leaned forward, her voice tight with barely controlled panic. We need to know what's happening with the company's financial structure. Our operating accounts have been frozen, payroll is backed up, and we've got vendors calling every 5 minutes asking about bounce payments. And there are rumors, added Marcus Webb, the head of business development, about some kind of acquisition or hostile takeover. The financial press is sniffing around, asking questions about ownership changes and leadership transitions. I looked around the table at these 7 people who'd helped build Kane Dynamics into a $175 million company. Smart, dedicated professionals who'd worked 60-hour weeks and sacrificed personal time to make Dominic's vision a reality. They deserved better than what was about to happen to them, but unfortunately, they'd been collateral damage. Well, I said, opening my briefcase and pulling out a folder, I have some news that should clarify the situation. I placed copies of the acquisition documents in front of each board member. The Blackstone Legal Partners logo was prominently displayed at the top of each page, followed by language that was both crystal clear and utterly devastating to everyone in the room. As of market close on Friday, I said, watching their faces as they read, I've sold my majority stake in Kane Dynamics to Blackstone Legal Partners. The sale was completed this morning, and they're now the controlling shareholder of the company. The silence that followed was the kind of complete, profound quiet that happens when a room full of intelligent people realizes that their entire professional universe has just been rewritten without their input or consent. Brad was the first to find his voice. Your majority stake? Michael, you own less than 15% of the company. I smiled the kind of smile that venture capitalists use when explaining to entrepreneurs why their company is being dissolved. Actually, Brad, I owned 90% of Kane Dynamics. Dominic held 10% and served as CEO, but I've been the majority shareholder since day one. Sarah's face had gone completely white. That's impossible. Dominic founded this company. He built it from nothing. Dominic had the vision, I said. I had the capital. 90% of the startup funding, 90% of the operational investment, 90% of the expansion capital, all of it came from my personal portfolio. In exchange, I received 90% ownership. It's all documented in the original incorporation papers, if you'd like to review them. Marcus was frantically scrolling through his phone, probably pulling up the corporate filings that he should have read more carefully 18 months ago. But why? Why would you sell the Blackstone? We're profitable, we're growing, we just landed the Morrison Industries contract. Because, I interrupted, my priorities have changed. I'm divesting from certain business relationships that no longer align with my personal interests. The euphemism hung in the air like smoke from a fired gun. These people weren't stupid. They could probably guess that my sudden decision to sell had something to do with the mysterious personnel changes and Dominic's abrupt departure. But they'd never know the full story. They'd never know about the graduation party, the Instagram post, or the fact that their former CEO had been playing house with my wife while I funded his professional dreams. "What does this mean for us?" asked Jennifer Walsh, the head of legal affairs, in the kind of voice people use when they already know the answer but hope they're wrong. "Blackstone's representatives will be here this afternoon," I said, checking my watch. "They'll be conducting individual meetings with all senior staff to assess the current organizational structure and determine optimal strategic alignment going forward." In corporate speak, that translated to, they're going to fire half of you and restructure the rest of the company according to their own vision. They paid a premium for Kane Dynamics because they believed they were acquiring Dominic's leadership and vision, I continued. Now that Dominic's no longer part of the equation, they'll need to reevaluate whether the company still meets their investment criteria. Brad's hands were shaking as he set down the acquisition documents. "Michael, this company employs 47 people. Some of them have families, mortgages, kids in college. You can't just—" "I can, and I did," I said, standing up and closing my briefcase. Blackstone Legal Partners is a reputable firm with extensive experience in corporate restructuring. I'm confident they'll make decisions that are in the best interests of their investment. Which was a polite way of saying, not my problem anymore. I walked toward the door, then paused and turned back to face the room full of shell-shocked executives. "For what it's worth, you're all talented professionals. I'm sure you'll land on your feet, regardless of what Blackstone decides." Then I left them there to contemplate the smoking crater where their careers used to be. 2 weeks later, I was standing in a converted warehouse in Brooklyn, watching a 27-year-old coding prodigy explain why her legal tech startup was going to revolutionize how law firms handle research. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was back in the borough where Dominic had started Kane Dynamics, except this time I was looking at something that actually deserved my investment. The space was nothing like Kane Dynamics' polished Park Avenue offices. Exposed brick walls, concrete floors, and the kind of industrial lighting that made everything look like a hipster coffee shop. But there was energy here, the kind of focused intensity that happens when smart people are building something they actually believe in, rather than just trying to impress investors and climb corporate ladders. "The problem with legal research," Ava Lynn was saying, gesturing toward a wall covered in white boards that looked like they'd been attacked by a caffeinated mathematician, "is that it's still stuck in the 19th century. Lawyers are paying junior associates $300 an hour to do work that artificial intelligence could handle in minutes." I nodded, sipping coffee from a chipped mug that probably came from some thrift store in Williamsburg. The coffee was terrible, bitter, weak, and served at approximately room temperature, but I was more interested in what Ava was saying than the quality of her beverage service. "Show me the demo," I said. Ava's eyes lit up like someone had just offered her unlimited funding and a lifetime supply of Red Bull. She practically bounced over to her laptop, which was connected to a massive monitor that dominated one wall of the workspace. "Okay, so imagine you're working on a complex merger case," she said, her fingers flying across the keyboard. Traditional research would involve sending 3 junior lawyers to spend 40 hours combing through legal databases, precedent cases, and regulatory filings. They'd bill the client $36,000 for work that mostly involves keyword searches and document review. The screen filled with a clean, intuitive interface that looked nothing like the clunky legal databases I'd seen lawyers struggling with for years. "Now watch this," Ava said, typing in a search query that would have taken those junior lawyers days to properly research. Results appeared instantly. Not just a list of cases and statutes, but an organized, weighted analysis of relevant precedents, complete with confidence ratings and strategic recommendations. The AI had sorted through thousands of documents, identified the most relevant materials, and presented them in a format that actually made sense. "This is impressive," I said, and I meant it. I'd seen plenty of tech demos over the years, most of them promising to revolutionize industries that didn't particularly want to be revolutionized. But this was different. This solved a real problem that cost law firms millions of dollars annually. "We're not trying to replace lawyers," Ava continued, clearly warming to her favorite subject. "We're trying to make them more efficient. Instead of spending weeks on research, they can spend their time on strategy, client relationships, actual legal thinking. The stuff that humans are actually good at." I walked around the workspace, taking in the setup. 6 developers working at standing desks that looked like they'd been assembled from IKEA parts and industrial pipe fittings. A conference area made from a reclaimed door balanced on sawhorses. Whiteboards covered with flowcharts, user interface mock-ups, and what appeared to be a betting pool about which pizza place delivered fastest to their address. This was what a real startup looked like. Lean, focused, built by people who cared more about solving problems than impressing anyone. It reminded me of my own early days, back when I was trading stocks from a studio apartment and living on ramen noodles and stubborn determination. "What's your current funding situation?" I asked. Ava's enthusiasm dimmed slightly. "We've been bootstrapping so far. I had some savings from my previous job at Google, and the team is working for equity until we can afford proper salaries. We've got enough runway for maybe 3 more months. And then..." She shrugged, trying to look casual about the fact that her company was 3 months away from bankruptcy. "Then we either find investors, or we all go back to working for other people's dreams." I pulled out my phone and showed her the research I'd done on her background while riding the subway to Brooklyn. MIT computer science degree, 3 years at Google working on machine learning algorithms, 2 years at a legal tech startup that had been acquired by Thomson Reuters. Her code was elegant, her strategic thinking was sound, and most importantly, she was solving a problem that actually mattered. "Tell me about your team," I said. "Best engineers I've ever worked with," Ava said, gesturing toward the developers who were pretending not to eavesdrop on our conversation. Sarah over there built recommendation engines for Netflix. Marcus worked on fraud detection algorithms for PayPal. Kim was the lead developer on that document analysis platform that LexisNexis bought for $40 million last year. And they're all working for equity. They believe in what we're building. Everyone here could get jobs at Google or Facebook tomorrow, making twice what I'll be able to pay them for the next 2 years. But they're here because they want to build something that matters. That was the difference between this company and Kane Dynamics. Dominic had been building a consulting firm to feed his own ego and impress people at legal industry cocktail parties. Ava was building something that could actually change how an entire profession operated. "What do you need to scale?" I asked. "Realistically, $10 million would let us hire the team we need, build out our infrastructure, and fund operations for the next 18 months. 15 million would be better. We could expand faster, maybe open a West Coast office, start targeting the really big law firms." I walked back to the whiteboard covered with user interface mock-ups. The design was clean, intuitive, obviously built by people who understood that lawyers didn't have time to learn complicated software just to do basic research. "Have you talked to potential customers?" "Actual law firms. We've got pilot programs running with 3 mid-sized firms in Manhattan," Ava said. "The feedback has been incredible. Partners are telling us we're saving them 60 to 70% on research costs, and the quality of analysis is actually better than what their junior associates were producing." "Show me the numbers." For the next hour, Ava walked me through financial projections, market analysis, and customer acquisition strategies that were surprisingly sophisticated for a company operating out of a converted warehouse. She'd done her homework. More importantly, she understood both the technical challenges and the business realities of what she was trying to build. "The legal industry spends $12 billion annually on research and document review," she said, pulling up a slide that showed market size and growth projections. "If we can capture even 2% of that market, we're looking at a $250 million business." I closed my laptop and looked around the workspace one more time. 6 brilliant engineers, working for equity and pizza, building something that could legitimately disrupt a multi-billion-dollar industry. It was exactly the kind of investment opportunity I'd been looking for my entire career. Ava, I said, what if I told you I could write you a check for $15 million right now? 45% equity, board seat, full operational control stays with you. Her face went through approximately 17 different emotions in the span of 3 seconds. Shock, disbelief, excitement, suspicion, and finally, cautious optimism. I'd say you're either the best angel investor in New York or you're running some kind of elaborate scam. I laughed, the first genuine laugh I'd had since that night outside the locked venue. No scam, just a guy who knows a good investment when he sees one. I pulled out my checkbook and started writing. $15 million, payable to Lynn Technologies, LLC. The same amount I'd made in profit from selling Kane Dynamics, reinvested into something that actually deserved to succeed. Welcome to the big leagues, I said, handing her the check. For the first time in 2 weeks, I felt like I was building something instead of destroying it. 3 days after writing that check to Ava, I was sitting in a corner booth at a quiet cafe on the Upper East Side, watching my soon-to-be ex-wife fidget with her coffee cup like it held the secrets to salvaging her reputation. She'd finally agreed to meet. Probably because her credit cards were still frozen and she needed to eat something that didn't come from a food truck. The cafe was one of those understated places that charged $12 for coffee but didn't feel the need to advertise it with neon signs and Instagram-worthy latte art. Just good coffee, comfortable seating, and the kind of acoustic design that let you have private conversations without the entire room listening in. Perfect for what I had planned. Leah looked better than she had during our last encounter, but not by much. She'd managed to shower and change clothes, but there were dark circles under her eyes that makeup couldn't quite hide, and her usually confident posture had been replaced by the hunched shoulders of someone who'd spent the past week discovering that financial independence wasn't just a catchphrase from women's magazines. You look like you've been sleeping, I said, settling into the booth across from her. Some. She wrapped her hands around her coffee mug like it was a life preserver. Michael, I've been thinking about your terms. And they're designed to humiliate me. I stirred sugar into my espresso and considered her statement. They're designed to correct the public record. There's a difference. You want me to publicly admit that you funded my entire education while I thanked someone else for it. That's humiliation. That's honesty. I leaned back against the booth's leather upholstery. You made a choice to rewrite history in that Instagram post. Now you get to choose whether to correct it voluntarily or let other people figure out the truth on their own. She was quiet for a long moment, staring out the cafe's windows at the pedestrians hurrying past on their way to jobs that probably didn't hang in the balance of social media posts and financial revenge schemes. What happened to Dominic? She asked finally. What do you mean? He won't return my calls. His assistant says he's unavailable for the foreseeable future. His LinkedIn profile shows he's seeking new opportunities. What did you do to him? I almost felt bad for her. Almost. She genuinely seemed to believe that Dominic had been some kind of independent success story, a brilliant legal mind who'd built his own empire through talent and determination. The fact that his entire professional existence had been funded by her husband was apparently news to her. I didn't do anything to Dominic, I said. I simply stopped doing things for him. That's cryptic even for you. Kane Dynamics was my company, Leah. 90% ownership, fully documented, completely legal. Dominic was essentially a very well-paid employee who got to play CEO because I liked his business plan. The coffee mug slipped from her hands, clattering against the saucer. That's impossible. The incorporation papers are public record. You're a lawyer. You know how to look these things up. But he built that company from nothing. He was working 18-hour days, making all the strategic decisions, landing all the major clients. With my money. I pulled out my phone and showed her the bank transfer records that I'd printed out for exactly this conversation. 18 months of operational funding, startup capital, expansion loans, office leases. All of it came from my investment portfolio. She stared at the documents like they were written in a foreign language. Why would you fund his company? Because my wife asked me to help her friend who was struggling to get his legal consulting firm off the ground. Remember that conversation? You said he was brilliant, but just needed someone to believe in him. The color drained from her face as the pieces clicked into place. Oh God, So when you thanked him for sponsoring your education, you were essentially thanking him for spending my money on your tuition while I spent my money on his business. It's like a financial Russian nesting doll of irony. Michael, I didn't know. Of course you didn't know, because you never asked. You just assumed that your brilliant boyfriend had built his own empire, and you were happy to let everyone think he was your sugar daddy instead of me. She put her head in her hands, her shoulders shaking slightly. I wasn't sure if she was crying or just trying to process the magnitude of how badly she'd miscalculated the situation. The public statement, I said, pulling a printed draft from my briefcase. Let's go through it together and make sure we get the wording right. She looked up at me with red-rimmed eyes. You're really going to make me do this. You're going to do this because it's the truth. And because the alternative is watching me spend the next 5 years proving in court that you committed fraud by misrepresenting the source of your educational funding to potential employers and professional contacts. I slid the draft across the table. Read it out loud. I want to make sure it sounds natural. She picked up the paper with hands that were visibly shaking. I want to publicly acknowledge and thank my husband, Michael Thompson, for his complete financial support throughout my law school journey. Michael paid for my tuition, living expenses, and educational costs without any assistance from other parties. My recent social media posts incorrectly suggested that others had sponsored my education, and I apologize for any confusion this may have caused. Michael's generous support made my legal career possible, and I am grateful for his investment in my future. Too formal, I said. It sounds like a hostage video. Try again, but make it sound like something you'd actually write. She looked at me like I'd asked her to recite the phone book in Mandarin. How do you want me to make this sound natural? I'm publicly admitting that I lied about who paid for my law school education. You're publicly correcting an error. There's a difference. For the next hour, we went through the statement line by line, adjusting the language until it sounded like something a person might actually post on social media rather than something dictated by a divorce attorney. The final version was shorter, more conversational, but still contained all the key admissions I needed on the record. When does this go live? She asked. Tonight. Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, and you're going to email it to the legal industry publications that covered your graduation. Law Journal, American Lawyer, Legal Times, all of them. This is Legal Times, all of them. This is going to destroy my reputation. Your reputation was built on a lie. I'm just giving you the chance to correct it before someone else does the research and figures it out themselves. She folded the statement and put it in her purse like she was handling toxic waste. And after this, after I humiliate myself publicly and admit that my successful boyfriend was actually just spending my husband's money. After this, you and Dominic get to build whatever life you want together. Just not with my funding and not with my name attached to your success stories. She stood up to leave, then paused. For what it's worth, I really didn't mean for things to happen this way. I know, I said, but they did happen this way, and now we all get to live with the consequences. She walked out of the cafe without looking back, probably heading home to spend the rest of the day figuring out how to explain to her friends and colleagues why she was about to publicly contradict everything she'd told them about her relationship with Dominic. I ordered another espresso and checked my phone. Ava had sent me a text with photos from their office. The team celebrating their new funding with champagne that probably cost less than Leah's usual lunch. Real celebration from people who'd actually earned something worth celebrating. By tomorrow morning, everyone in Manhattan's legal community would know the real story behind Leah Thompson's law school education. And for the first time in weeks, I was looking forward to reading the comments. 6 months later, I was standing in the sunlight streaming through the windows of my new apartment on the Upper West Side, drinking coffee that didn't cost $12 and feeling genuinely content for the first time in years. 2 bedrooms, hardwood floors, and absolutely zero marble countertops or designer bullshit that screamed, "Look how much money I have." Just a normal place where a normal person might actually want to live. The divorce had been finalized 3 weeks ago. Quick, clean, and exactly according to the terms I'd outlined in that envelope Maya had delivered what felt like a lifetime ago. Leah had signed everything without attempting to negotiate, probably because her lawyer had explained in very small words what would happen if she tried to fight a guy who documented every financial transaction with the obsessive precision of a Swiss accountant. She'd moved to Portland, of all places, working for some nonprofit legal aid clinic that helped low-income families with housing disputes. The irony wasn't lost on me that she'd gone from Manhattan corporate law to helping people who actually couldn't afford lawyers. Maybe getting her financial reality check had given her some perspective on what real problems looked like. She'd sent me a letter last month, handwritten, not typed, which was somehow more personal than anything she'd done in the last year of our marriage. I finally understand the difference between prestige and worth, she'd written. I'm sorry it took losing everything to figure that out. I'd folded the letter and put it in my desk drawer. Not as a keepsake, exactly, but as closure. Proof that the woman I'd married was still in there somewhere, underneath all the Instagram captions and professional networking bullshit. Dominic had landed on his feet, sort of. He was working for a mid-tier firm in Chicago, handling corporate compliance cases that probably bored him to tears after running his own company. His LinkedIn profile listed him as senior associate, which was corporate speak for former CEO who's now back to being someone else's employee. The legal press had moved on to other stories, but his name still occasionally came up as a cautionary tale about the dangers of rapid corporate expansion without proper financial backing. My phone buzzed with a text from Ava. Just closed the Morrison Industries deal. $2.3 million annual contract. Drinks at 6. I smiled and typed back, absolutely. My treat. Lynn Technologies had become exactly what I'd hoped it would be when I'd written that check in the Brooklyn warehouse. They'd landed 12 major clients, opened offices in Boston and San Francisco, and were being courted by venture capital firms who wanted to lead their Series B funding round. Ava had been featured on the cover of Legal Tech magazine as one of the industry's 30 under 30 disruptors, and unlike certain other people I could mention, she'd actually earned the recognition. I spent my days now doing things that actually mattered. Guest lectures at Columbia Law School about the intersection of technology and legal practice. Mentoring other startups that were trying to solve real problems instead of just chasing valuations. Serving on the board of Lynn Technologies and watching brilliant people build something that would outlast all of us. The apartment was quiet except for the distant sounds of the city going about its business. No designer furniture that cost more than cars. No art collections that existed solely to impress dinner party guests. No evidence of the life I'd built with someone who'd never really wanted to build anything with me at all. Just sunlight, good coffee, and the satisfaction of knowing that I'd won. Not because I'd destroyed Leah's financial security or ended Dominic's CEO career or forced them both to confront the reality of their choices. I'd won because I'd freed myself from a relationship that was built on transactions instead of trust, from supporting people who saw my money as an entitlement rather than a gift. I'd won because I was finally investing in things that deserved to succeed, working with people who wanted to build rather than just consume, living a life that belonged to me instead of performing in someone else's social media fantasy. My phone rang. Ava again. Change of plans, she said. The whole team wants to celebrate the Morrison deal. We're thinking that new rooftop place in Brooklyn. You in? I looked around my normal apartment with its normal furniture and its complete absence of Instagram-worthy moments, and realized I couldn't think of anywhere I'd rather be than celebrating with people who'd actually earned their success. I'm in, I said. See you there. I grabbed my jacket and headed for the door, leaving behind the sunlight and the quiet and the satisfaction of a well-executed victory. Time to go celebrate with people who understood the difference between building something real and just looking successful online. 6 months ago, I'd thought my life was over when I stood outside that locked venue door. Turns out it was just beginning. I can still hear it, the laugh. Not just the sound of it, but the way it sliced through everything I thought I knew. It was sharp, dismissive, too loud for what I'd said, and too cruel to be forgotten. I'd asked for a 10% raise. That's it. After 8 years of turning Westmere Holdings into the logistical powerhouse it had become, after redesigning their freight algorithms from scratch and streamlining the supply chains that bloated their profit margins, after working through holidays and pulling double shifts when deadlines loomed, I asked, quietly, respectfully, for a raise. A 10% bump. Not a throne. Not a crown. Just a reflection of value. Of worth. I had rehearsed it all morning. Kept it tight, concise. No emotion. Facts, metrics, performance data. I even printed the analytics summaries. Westmere's turnaround time had decreased by 41% since I stepped in. Delivery error rates dropped below 1%, and client retention had reached an all-time high. Numbers didn't lie. That's what I told myself. But I forgot something. Numbers don't lie, but powerful men don't listen. The boardroom was quiet when I made the request. I could feel my heartbeat in my neck as I slid the folder forward. I believe my performance warrants a revised compensation structure, I said. A 10% adjustment. I'm willing to renegotiate scope and take on expanded oversight to reflect the change. There was a pause. One heartbeat. Then two. Then Douglas Wren laughed. Loud and long. The kind of laugh that makes people unsure if they should join in. Some did. Some didn't. It didn't matter. Because the damage had already been done. His voice echoed in that cold glass box of a room, bouncing off polished walls and designer light fixtures like it had been waiting to humiliate me. Try elsewhere, he chuckled, shaking his head as if I'd told the punchline of a joke. He didn't even open the folder. 10%, he repeated, savoring it. Cute. What cut deeper than his words was the silence that followed. No one challenged him. No one asked to review my report. No one even shifted in their seats. And Celia, my wife, his daughter, sat 2 seats away, spine straight, lips tight, gaze fixed on the marble table. She didn't say a thing, not a word, not even a glance in my direction. I felt something hollow out inside me in that moment, like a slow, silent cave-in behind the ribs. I wasn't angry, not yet. What I felt was clarity, a chilling kind of awareness that slithered up the back of my neck and told me the truth. I was never one of them. Not really. Not in this room. Not in this family. I was tolerated, utilized, convenient, married in and handed a position that everyone assumed I was lucky to have. But they had no idea. They had no idea the systems I had built didn't begin here. They had no idea that the things they leaned on, automations, routing software, predictive scheduling tools, came from me, not from Westmere. From the hours I put in long after everyone else went home. On my own laptop, at my kitchen table. They didn't ask how I did it. They just took it. Because I was loyal. Because I married into the name. They assumed I wouldn't walk away. That I couldn't. I sat there in the conference room, not blinking, not moving, as Douglas continued the meeting like nothing had happened. My face didn't show anything. No humiliation. No heat. I just nodded once, quietly closed the folder, and folded my hands. The rest of the hour blurred into muffled voices and charts and projections I couldn't focus on. All I could see was Celia's profile, her face carved in stillness, as never meeting mine. And I realized something else. Maybe she believed it too. That I didn't deserve to ask. That I should have known my place. By the time the meeting ended, I had made a decision. Not out of spite. Not out of emotion. But out of certainty. I wasn't going to fight them for respect anymore. I wasn't going to justify myself or beg for a seat at a table that was designed to shrink me. I stood slowly, tucking the folder under my arm. As I turned to leave, Douglas clapped a hand on my shoulder. No hard feelings, huh? He said, still smiling. We value your work, son. Of course, I said with a calm he mistook for submission. No hard feelings at all. But as I walked out of that boardroom, I wasn't the same man who had walked in. Something in me had been rewritten. That laugh, it didn't just humiliate me. It rewired me, lit a fuse that had been waiting too long in silence. They thought they'd reminded me of my place. But all they really did was show me the door, and I had every intention of walking through it, because I had already built the blueprint for my future. Quietly, thoroughly, privately. They laughed because they thought I had nothing but this job, this title, their approval. They didn't realize I'd been preparing for this moment all along. And this was only the beginning. The house was quiet when I got home that night. Celia didn't come back with me. Said she had work to finish at her father's estate. I didn't ask questions. I didn't need to. The silence between us had grown roots. Deep ones. We used to talk about everything. Her cases, my systems, where we wanted to travel. Now, even the air between us felt transactional. Polite. Distant. I didn't bother turning on the lights as I walked through the living room, dropping my keys into the bowl by the door. My shoes came off next. Then the jacket. My tie loosened like it didn't want to be part of me anymore. I moved on instinct, right past the kitchen, past the dining room, down the hallway to the den I'd converted into an office 5 years ago. That room knew the truth better than anyone else. I opened the bottom drawer of the bookshelf and pulled out the old black notebook. Leather-bound, spine slightly cracked from years of thumbing through it, the corners curling from use. I laid it gently on the desk like a surgeon prepping for a delicate operation. It didn't look like much, just scribbles, columns of numbers, diagrams of flowcharts, process maps. But this notebook was the reason Westmere became what it was. And they never even knew it. Most people in the company assumed I was just good at implementing tools already out there. Some thought I used a team to draft models behind the scenes. They had no idea every algorithm used in the Renware suite came from this notebook. Every routing adjustment that saved them millions. Every scheduling module that cut costs. Every projection system that doubled their quarterly fulfillment. It was all born here, on weekends, late nights, coffee-fueled early mornings when I couldn't sleep and needed to work out an idea. At first, it had been passion. Then it became habit. Then it became the silent backbone of Westmere Holdings. They never asked who owned it. They just assumed it belonged to them. But they were wrong. The truth was that none of these models had ever been formally sold to Westmere. I had built them off the clock, at home, and not a single one had been transferred to the company under any legal acquisition. I had even offered a few times to license the software properly. I still had the emails. Let's circle back to this next quarter. Regina Hahn, Westmere's legal counsel, had replied once. That next quarter never came. They preferred to use the tools without paying for them. Why bother? I was family. I'd never leave. Their arrogance became my leverage. I sat down and flipped open the first few pages, tracing the timelines. Each system had an origin date, a build phase, beta testing data. I used a system of initials and color-coded tabs to track version control. I'd always been obsessive like that. Some called it neurotic. I called it insurance. The deeper I flipped, the angrier I felt, not with them, but with myself. I had given too much, too freely. I had built an empire under their name, believing the proximity to power was the same as possessing it. But I was done trading brilliance for breadcrumbs. I opened my laptop and began scanning pages into a secure drive, categorizing everything, routing algorithms, smart inventory balancing, automated carrier bidding templates. Each document was labeled, timestamped, encrypted. I backed everything up twice, external SSD and a remote encrypted cloud vault. If they wanted to challenge me down the line, they'd learn I didn't move impulsively. I moved strategically. When I reached the section titled Predictive Freight Demand, Gen 3, I paused. That was the crown jewel. Westmere had implemented a trimmed version of this 2 years ago. The version they had could predict shipping trends about 10 days out. But this version saw 30 days ahead. Combined with real-time data feeds, it was like giving a logistics firm a crystal ball. The next iteration was nearly done, and it didn't belong to them. It never had. My phone buzzed. A message from Celia, still at the estate. Don't wait up. I stared at the screen for a moment longer than I should have. There was no apology in her message. No acknowledgement of what happened in the boardroom. Maybe she thought it would blow over. Maybe she thought I would just take the insult and stay quiet. She didn't know who I'd become in that room. Or maybe she did, and she just didn't care anymore. I placed the notebook gently back on the desk, opened my email, and clicked through old folders. There it was, the white paper I'd written years ago, redefining velocity in freight distribution. I'd published it anonymously in a niche logistics journal. A few industry folks had reached out afterward. One name stood out, Julian Moreland, CEO of Redwood Logistics. I'd saved his email. He had written, "Brilliant work. If you're ever ready to have your name attached to your ideas, reach out. I'd like to meet the mind behind the curtain." That was 3 years ago. At the time, I wasn't interested. I believed in loyalty, in building legacy from within. But tonight, I realized that loyalty without respect was servitude, and I wasn't going to keep serving men who smirked while I spoke. I reopened the email thread and started typing. "Julian, not sure if you remember me. I'm ready to have my name attached. Are you still interested in meeting?" I stared at the message for a beat, then hit send. It was late, almost 2 in the morning, but sleep wouldn't come. I stayed at my desk, watching the screen, the blue light painting my face in quiet resolve. I didn't know what Julian would say, but I knew one thing for certain: Westmere's greatest asset had just decided to walk. And they had no idea he owned the road he was about to take. Julian Moreland replied within 4 hours. His message was short, but the tone came through clear. "Still interested. Let's meet. Tonight? My treat. Bring your appetite and your ideas." He suggested Magnolia House, a restaurant tucked into the east side of the city, The kind of place that didn't advertise itself with neon signs or Instagrammable interiors. It was legacy and subtlety, reputation without noise. Douglas Wren would never step foot in a place like that. Not because he couldn't afford it, but because he'd never heard of it, and that alone made it unworthy in his eyes. That's what made it perfect. I wore a simple navy button-up, slacks, nothing flashy. No tie. I wasn't there to impress anyone. Not anymore. I arrived 10 minutes early and waited in the candlelit front lounge. The air smelled of saffron and something charred, meat, probably. The hostess approached me twice, offering water, a drink. I declined both. My mind wasn't here for food. It was here for strategy. Julian arrived with the kind of quiet confidence that made everyone else in the room adjust without knowing why. Tall, but not looming. Salt in his beard, but fire in his eyes. He extended a hand and smiled like we'd known each other for years. "Mr. Wren, or do you prefer something else now?" he asked as we sat down. I let out a dry chuckle. "Let's go with what comes next. For now, just call me Cole." He nodded. "Fair enough. Cole it is." The waiter came and Julian ordered without asking for a menu. Apparently, he was a regular. I barely glanced at mine. I wasn't sure I'd eat much. Julian noticed. "Don't worry," he said. "This is more than a dinner. Think of it as a soft handshake before the real conversation begins." I nodded once. Understood. We talk logistics. Industry trends, the shrinking margins in freight, the inflation of talent acquisition costs. But it didn't take long before he leaned forward, laced his fingers together, and said, "Tell me what you've really got. I know Westmere didn't do what it did without someone pulling smarter strings behind the scenes. That someone's you. So, what exactly are we discussing here tonight?" I reached into my briefcase and pulled out 3 laminated sheets. No labels, no titles, just flow diagrams. Predictive modeling outlines, forecasting tiers, things only someone deep in this world would recognize. Julian's eyes lit up like a man reading a map to buried treasure. "You built these?" "From the ground up," I said. "All outside of company hours. All mine. And Westmere's using them?" "They're using watered-down versions I let them have for free," I said flatly. "They never purchased formal rights. Never paid royalties." I offered, quietly. They declined. He whistled low. "You must really love your wife." "Did," I said. "Now? I'm not sure what I love more, freedom or the fire this betrayal lit under me." Julian smiled like a man who recognized the exact shape of revenge. "Well, let's talk about freedom. I followed your work for a while, even before I knew who was behind it. You built Westmere's rise, but they made sure your name never touched a single press release. You ready for that to change?" I didn't blink. "I'm beyond ready." He leaned back, nodding. "Here's my offer. You come on as Redwood's Chief Architecture Officer. You'll lead all system innovations full authority. You want your own team? Handpick them. You want stock? I'll give you 2% equity up front, with quarterly vesting. You want your name on the patents? Done. You'll be the architect, not the builder who gets thanked in footnotes." It was more than I'd expected. Not just the money, though triple my current salary wasn't nothing, but the power, the recognition, the ownership. He was offering me my identity back. Julian paused, watching me. "Take your time. I'm not a man who rushes genius." I didn't need time. I reached into my briefcase again and slid a preliminary version of my proprietary system, Project Horizon, across the table. "I'll sign an MU tonight. A formal contract can follow. But I want a clause added, which is freedom to recruit talent from anywhere, including Westmere." He grinned. "I was hoping you'd say that." We ate. Or rather, he did. I mostly pushed steak around the plate and tried not to think about Celia. Not about her silence in the boardroom. Not about the message she hadn't sent since I left. This wasn't about her anymore. This was about what I had built and what I would build now that the restraints were gone. Julian raised his glass toward the end of the meal. "To being underestimated," he said. I clinked my water against his wine. "And to what comes next." We walked out together. He offered to send a car, but I declined. I wanted to walk. Wanted to feel my heels against the pavement, grounded and deliberate. I didn't rush. I let the night wrap around me like armor. By the time I got home, Celia's car was gone. No note. No message. Just silence. It didn't hurt like I thought it would. Not anymore. I walked into my office, placed the signed MOU on my desk, and opened the notebook again. This time, I smiled as I flipped through it. For the first time, these pages wouldn't be filtered through someone else's legacy. For the first time, the work, and the name attached to it, would be mine. Celia's family dinners were always events dressed up as tradition. Ren Wednesdays, they called them. Same seats, same servers, same rooftop view of the city skyline. Everything choreographed. Crystal glasses where no one drank more than a third, laughter that never reached the eyes, and compliments disguised as dominance. Douglas Wren, my father-in-law, took the head of the table like it was carved for him. Always the loudest voice, always the one to toast, always with a speech at the end as if the boardroom didn't follow him into the dining room. Celia sat 2 seats down from him. I was across from her, always across. Like even the table knew I wasn't one of them. I used to smile through these dinners. Not when I was supposed to. Laugh at his rehearsed jokes. Raise my glass to achievements I had quietly made possible but was never named for. But tonight was different. I wasn't there to belong. I was there to end it. We arrived together, Celia and me, but didn't say much in the elevator. Her perfume was expensive, understated, like everything about her. She looked stunning, but distant. Her gaze didn't linger on me, not even once. I wondered if she knew. If she had sensed the shift in me, felt it rising beneath the silence of our last few weeks. She didn't ask why I was carrying a sealed envelope in my blazer. She didn't ask much of anything anymore. The dining room staff welcomed us with that polished, over-practiced warmth that luxury breeds. I sat down, greeted Douglas with the usual evening, sir, and took my place. I sipped from the wine he liked, complimented the duck confit even though it tasted like ash in my mouth, and waited until the second course was served. The timing mattered. I wanted the room full. I wanted witnesses. Not out of pettiness, but for clarity. So there'd be no confusion about what I said or who I said it to. The clinking of silverware dulled for a moment as I reached into my blazer and pulled out the envelope. Douglas looked up mid-chew, amused, as though expecting a birthday card. "What's this?" he asked, dabbing the corner of his mouth with a cloth napkin. "My resignation," I said. My voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. Celia's fork slipped and hit her plate with a sharp clatter. Douglas stopped chewing. The amusement drained from his face, replaced by a flash of confusion that quickly calcified into prideful dismissal. "Excuse me," he said, as if the words couldn't register. I placed the envelope in front of him, centered it on the white linen. "Effective in 2 weeks. I'll submit the formal transition documents to HR tomorrow. I've already made a list of my responsibilities for reassignment." The silence was loud. Knives hovered midair. No one reached for bread. Across the table, Celia didn't look at me. Not in shock. Not in anger. Just nothing. That absence hurt more than I thought it would. Douglas slowly pushed back in his chair, arms folded. "You're joking." "You told me to try elsewhere," I said evenly. I did. A few of the cousins blinked, unsure if they should be impressed or horrified. Celia's mother cleared her throat, but didn't speak. I glanced around the table, locking eyes with each of them, not for effect, but so they'd remember. Remember I didn't yell, didn't flinch. I just walked out with my spine straight and my pride intact. Douglas scoffed. "Do you understand what you're walking away from?" "Yes," I said. "I do." "You're throwing away your future." "No," I said calmly. "I'm reclaiming it." The waiter arrived to pour wine and froze mid-step, unsure whether to proceed. I waved him off gently. The poor kid didn't need to be part of this. "You think you can do better?" Douglas asked, but the edge in his voice was brittle now. "That someone else will give you what we gave you?" "I'm not interested in what's given anymore," I replied. "I'm interested in what's earned." He looked at Celia then, searching for backup, for outrage, for a shared look of contempt that could stabilize the table. But she just sipped her water. Not a flicker of protest. Maybe she was in shock. Or maybe, just maybe, she had nothing left to say because she knew what this family had taken from me. I stood up, buttoned my blazer. "Thank you for dinner," I said. "And for the years I spent in service to Westmere. They were not wasted. They were just misdirected." I turned to leave. Douglas called out, "You won't be welcomed back." I paused only long enough to respond. "That's the idea." I walked out of the restaurant with my hands loose at my sides, my pulse calm. I didn't storm out. I didn't make a scene. Because power doesn't come from volume, it comes from certainty. And I had never been more certain than in that moment. I had spent 8 years building someone else's legacy. Now, I would build my own. Outside, the wind off the rooftops was cold against my skin. My phone buzzed. A message from Julian. Everything still on track? I typed back. Resignation delivered. No fireworks. Just silence. The best kind. His reply came a moment later. Perfect. Let me know when you're ready to finalize team structure. We're clearing a floor for your division. I looked back once at the glass tower behind me. The dining room was still glowing from within, forks picking up again, wine being refilled. The machine of the Rin family turning on without a hitch, as if nothing had happened. And maybe to them, it hadn't. But to me, everything changed. Not because I left, but because I finally chose myself. For the first time in years, I didn't feel small walking away from that table. I felt taller. I walked into HR the next morning with the calm of someone who knew he was untouchable. No rage, no righteousness, just order, timing, and facts. The kind of clarity that shakes people more than shouting ever could. Madison, the HR director, stood as I entered, nervous smile stretched a little too tight across her face. Cole, hi. We got your resignation, she said, gesturing toward the conference room already prepped for this exit meeting. Legal folders, 2 cups of coffee, and a nervous junior associate who wouldn't meet my eyes. They thought I was another disgruntled exec they'd smooth over with paperwork and exit pleasantries. They were wrong. I took my seat, opened my briefcase, and placed 2 things on the table, the worn black notebook and a printed copy of my original employment contract. The notebook looked like nothing, but it was everything. They just didn't know it yet. We've prepared your final off-boarding documents, Madison began. Standard terms. Severance, benefits carryover, NDA, and of course the non-compete agreement you signed at onboarding. I leaned forward slightly, voice calm. I won't be signing a non-compete. Her mouth parted slightly. Well, you already did. I slid the contract across the table and pointed to the onboarding section. Read it. Page 14, supposed to be the clause about future industry limitations. Notice anything missing? She scanned it quickly, then passed it to the legal associate. His brow furrowed. He flipped back and forth, looked at me, then back at Madison. There's no non-compete language in this version. Exactly, I said. It was never included. I never signed one. That's unusual, Madison said, trying to keep her tone professional, but her voice was already cracking. We always include. You must have missed it, I replied, with just enough edge to let it land. Or assumed I wouldn't notice. The associate cleared his throat. Even so, intellectual property developed during employment, I cut him off by sliding the notebook toward them. Stop. Before you speak again, I suggest you read this. He looked confused, then opened it. At first, it probably looked like nonsense. Algorithms, systems, process maps, and color-coded tags. Then his expression changed. I saw it in real time, the dawning realization that these weren't just notes. This was the skeleton of Westmere's success. The routing matrix on page 9 alone was worth millions. And it was dated, months before I ever officially pitched anything to the company. These are your designs? He asked, eyes wide. Yes. Developed off the clock. At home. On personal equipment. None of it was formally transferred or acquired by Westmere. In fact, I emailed legal twice over the years offering to license this material. I slid a printed copy of one of those emails across the table. Regina Hahn responded to this one. Let's revisit next quarter. You never did. They both stared at the evidence. The silence in the room stretched. So, I continued, you will not be enforcing a non-compete. And any attempt to restrict my employment based on these innovations will be met with a formal countersuit. The associate started to speak, then thought better of it. I watched as he flipped pages, checking dates, checking metadata notations I'd handwritten with timestamps. His fingers were trembling slightly. The corporate mask was slipping. I'll need to escalate this, he finally muttered. I assumed as much, I said, standing. I'll expect your formal clearance documents by Friday. If I don't receive them, or if any language implies restriction, I'll take this to the press and the patent board simultaneously. Madison stood as well, trying to salvage the moment. Cole, let's not make this adversarial. You've done incredible work here. I know, I said, picking up the notebook. And that's why I'm not staying. As I walked out of HR, a few employees glanced up from their desks. Some recognized me. A few even gave tentative waves. I nodded, but didn't stop. I wasn't part of this place anymore. I had already peeled away from its gravity. By the time I reached my car, my phone buzzed. Julian. Heard from someone inside. They're rattled. Everything okay? I typed back. More than okay. They didn't read the fine print. I did. He replied with a thumbs-up emoji, then. Ready to announce you to the Redwood team this week. Prepping press if you're comfortable. I paused before replying. Press meant visibility. Visibility meant retaliation from the Ren machine. But it also meant freedom. For the first time in years, I wasn't going to be the ghost behind someone else's empire. Do it. That afternoon, I returned home and pulled out a manila folder of old blueprints, system ideas I had shelved over the years because I knew Westmere wouldn't understand them. Predictive warehouse clustering, drone-based priority fulfillment, multi-node regional staging for disaster logistics. They weren't just ideas. They were future-proofing. And now, they were mine to shape. Celia came home late. She didn't mention the dinner. Didn't ask how my offboarding went. Just went straight to the bedroom, as if the air between us wasn't thick with decisions she had already made in silence. I didn't chase her. Didn't ask for her side. Some things don't need to be screamed to be understood. That night, I scanned the entire notebook, page by page, into a private cloud vault. I uploaded it to Redwood's secure drive as well. Julian's tech lead pinged me in the chat room 20 minutes later. This is gold. We're integrating your freight tiering system immediately. I sat back, staring at the screen. For the first time in a long while, my name was going to be on something that mattered. Not in footnotes, not in whispered praise, but bold, public, unapologetic. Westmere built its reputation on borrowed innovation, and they assumed the man who built it wouldn't notice. They assumed wrong. They gave me an office with a view. Not one of those ego-driven glass boxes at the top of a tower, but something smarter, corner of the 4th floor at Redwood's operations wing, where I could see the warehouse grids, the routing docks, the heartbeat of the company. Julian knew I didn't want a palace. I wanted proximity to the system. I wanted to watch the thing breathe. My title was Lead Architect of Logistics Innovation, but it might as well have Red Builder of the Future. We launched Project Horizon within the first month. Clean rollout. No red tape. Redwood's internal engineers were lean, hungry, and brilliant. I fed them my system schematics, and they translated code like poetry. We didn't need to ask permission. There were no 12-person committees second-guessing every line of implementation. No legacy weight slowing us down. Everything I'd wanted Westmere to do years ago, we did in weeks. Horizon wasn't just a tool, it was a shift. A fully adaptive, predictive delivery management engine. Real-time response to traffic, warehouse delays, weather disruptions. Machine learning forecasted shipping demand patterns with frightening precision. Clients didn't just notice, they were stunned. Within 3 weeks, our client support center started receiving emails that all read the same way. How are you doing this? And I didn't hide the answer, because the world needed to know. We sent out a press release. Julian's team drafted it, but I added the closing line myself. Redwood Logistics is proud to announce Project Horizon, designed and led by Cole Wren, to redefine what efficient, ethical, and intelligent logistics looks like in the 21st century. For the first time in my career, my name was tied to my work publicly. I didn't hide behind acronyms or Wren Holdings letterhead. I stood in the light, and Westmere noticed. The first account we flipped was Callahan Industrial, medium size, high volume, distribution heavy. They called us after 1 week of Horizon's public launch. They'd been with Westmere for 8 years, but were suddenly hemorrhaging delays and upcharges. We showed them how Horizon could cut their transit time by 32%, costs by 19%, and waste by half. They signed within 48 hours. Next was Everway, then Kelby Freight, then Easton International. Easton was the real strike. Douglas had once called Easton the Diamond Vein, the account that paid bonuses across 3 departments and funded Celia's first expansion office. I remember the way he spoke about it at dinner one year, glass raised, saying, "No matter what happens, we'll always have Easton." Until they didn't. Julian told me about it on a Tuesday morning. Walked into my office holding a coffee I hadn't asked for, placed it gently on my desk, and said, "You might want to sit." "I am sitting," I said, suspicious. "Easton just terminated their Westmere contract," he replied. "Signed with us 5 minutes ago. It's done." I stared at him, not in disbelief, but in confirmation. The shift had begun. "We onboard them next week," Julian added. "They want a custom build out of Horizon. You lead that." My phone buzzed 15 minutes later. A number I hadn't seen in weeks. Douglas. I didn't answer. Then, a message. From Celia. We need to talk. About what's happening. About Easton. I stared at it for a long time, the glow of the screen pulsing in my hand like a warning light. There was a time, not long ago, when a text from her would have shifted my whole day. When I would have dropped meetings, rescheduled calls, driven across the city just to sit next to her. But now? Her silence at that boardroom table echoed louder than her message ever could. And silence has a memory. When it doesn't let go of easily. I didn't respond. Instead, I walked down to the ops bay, stood at the balcony overlooking the logistics floor, and watched the team work. I saw it all, the numbers being punched into Horizon's live dashboard, the forecast painting dynamic arcs across wall-sized displays. Delivery lanes glowing in real time, warehouses syncing in a harmony I'd dreamed of for years. And every screen bore one quiet watermark at the bottom right, built with Horizon, by Colren. I knew what Westmere was doing behind the scenes. They were scrambling, trying to find ways to patch the holes without naming them, trying to reverse engineer what they didn't understand, trying to explain to investors why their delivery times were climbing while ours were dropping. They didn't know it yet, but this was just the first blow, because Horizon was still evolving. We were already developing Horizon Stream, a live client-side dashboard that would let partners see projected bottlenecks hours in advance. Transparent data. No more reactive firefighting. Just clarity. Something Westmere had never believed in. Julian called a leadership meeting the next day. 3 weeks in, he told the room, and Redwood is seeing operational metrics we projected for Q4. That's the Colren effect. I didn't smile at the compliment. I didn't need it. I hadn't come here for applause. I came here for air. And finally, I could breathe. That night, I drove home and passed Westmere's downtown tower, lit up and sterile as always. I parked across the street and just watched for a while. Not with bitterness. With closure. I had spent years giving everything to a building that never once gave anything back. Now, I was building my own. And this? This was only the first strike. It was a Friday when the envelope landed on my desk. Thick, gold-trimmed, sealed with Westmere's corporate stamp like it was an invitation to a ball. Inside, a formal cease and desist letter, the first shot fired from Douglas's war chest. The accusation? Intellectual property theft. They claimed Horizon was derived from proprietary Westmere technology developed under my tenure. I sat back in my chair, holding the letter like it was a joke someone forgot to laugh at. Redwood's legal team gathered in my office within the hour. Julian, Regina from our side, no relation to Westmere's former counsel, and 2 sharp young associates who could have been partners at any firm in New York if they wanted to be. Julian read the first few lines aloud and let out a breath between amusement and irritation. They're playing checkers, he muttered. You're 10 moves ahead on a chessboard. I told you this might come, I said. You also told me you documented everything. I slid a thick folder across the table, labeled Asset Authorship Ledger. Inside were printed, notarized records, dated logs of development, version histories, screenshots of source code from my personal server, all timestamped. Email threads, cloud backup history, even handwritten journal entries with parallel build timelines. Every bit of Horizon's DNA was created off-site, off-hours, and off-books. Julian opened a second envelope I handed him, Westmere's original employment agreement with me, highlighted sections showing the glaring absence of an IP clause. No non-compete. No work-for-hire language. Nothing. Jesus, one of the lawyers whispered, flipping through the contents like she was holding proof of a royal scandal. That's not even the best part, I said, opening my laptop. I tapped into the backup drive and pulled up my email archive. These are all the times I offered to formally license my systems to them. Julian raised an eyebrow. They declined. They ignored me, or delayed the conversation. He turned to the team. That makes this willful negligence, not just a civil dispute. We filed our response within 48 hours, an airtight, heavily footnoted rebuttal with counterclaims of attempted suppression, false allegations, and malicious interference. We didn't just defend ourselves. We went for the throat. The court date was expedited, likely because of the noise surrounding Horizon's success. Business publications had already started speculating on Westmere's plummeting market share. The lawsuit only confirmed what people were whispering. Westmere was in trouble. Celia didn't reach out. Douglas didn't either. But their silence made it clear they were betting on intimidation. They thought dragging me to court would shake Redwood's confidence. maybe even stall our momentum. But I didn't flinch, because I knew something Douglas never understood. When you build something with your own hands, every line of code, every diagram, every late-night revision, it doesn't belong to anyone else, especially not the man who laughed in your face for asking to be valued. We stepped into court on a gray morning. I wore a charcoal suit, no tie. Julian flanked me on one side. Our counsel walked tall, shoulders squared. Across the aisle, Douglas sat stiffly in a bespoke pinstripe suit, surrounded by his own legal phalanx. His expression was unreadable, but there was something behind his eyes I hadn't seen before. Fear. The proceedings started calmly enough. Westmere's attorney presented the claim with all the practiced venom of a man used to bullying competitors into settlements. He spoke about corporate betrayal, about unauthorized use of proprietary systems, and about ethical obligations ignored. Then our side began. Regina approached the bench and started unpacking, page by page, a narrative not of betrayal, but of meticulous authorship. Every submission was dated, every system traceable to personal time and personal resources. She read from my emails, displayed side-by-side comparisons of Horizon and Westmere's legacy software, showing clearly that they were not only different in core architecture, but that Westmere's version was technically inferior. Then she turned to the bench and said, "Your Honor, I direct your attention to Exhibit 29, an internal Westmere email where Mr. Wren's proposal for licensing was ignored. They had the opportunity to legally acquire this system. They chose not to. Their oversight does not entitle them to ownership after the fact." The judge, a woman in her 60s with sharp eyes and no tolerance for ego, leaned forward. "Let me clarify. You're stating that the defendant repeatedly offered to license his independent work to the plaintiff and was dismissed?" "Yes, Your Honor," Regina replied. "And we have the documented proof." The judge looked toward Westmere's side. "And is that claim disputed?" Their counsel stammered, deflecting toward vague employment loyalty language. The judge cut him off. "Not good enough. If you had no legal contract, no written agreement of IP transfer, and you declined to pursue ownership when offered the opportunity, you cannot claim theft. That's not how intellectual property works." Douglas shifted in his seat. The judge looked directly at him. "Mr. Wren, you may want to rethink your approach to innovation. Dismissing it doesn't mean you own it." She dismissed the case before lunch. Just like that, it was over. Outside the courthouse, a small group of reporters waited, cameras ready. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. Julian issued a simple statement on behalf of Redwood. "We believe in honoring innovation, not appropriating it." Today's ruling affirms that belief. News of the court loss spread like fire through the industry. Westmere's investors began pulling out. Clients asked questions. Internal memos leaked. Rumors of department freezes and delayed bonuses swirled. They tried to contain it. But you can't put the pieces back once people see the cracks. I sat at my desk that night, watching the press coverage play on mute. My phone buzzed again, this time from Celia. "You didn't have to destroy everything." I stared at it, emotionless. Then I replied, "I didn't. I just stopped letting you all take what wasn't yours." She didn't respond. I closed my laptop and turned off the lights. Redwood was quiet, humming with the software of servers and distant conversations. It felt like home, like possibility, like breath. They thought the lawsuit would bury me, but it only confirmed what I already knew. They never owned me. It started with a whisper, not a dramatic headline, not a televised apology, just a quiet rumor, a spreadsheet leaked from inside Westmere showing 23% of their contracts up for renegotiation, and not a single new acquisition in 3 months. Then the layoffs began. At first, they trimmed the edges. Regional sales consultants, mid-level analysts. But I knew the pattern. You don't cut out your outer shell unless the rot is already eaten through the center. Redwood's acquisition strategy wasn't driven by revenge. It was a rescue mission. We weren't looking to humiliate Westmere. That part had already been done by their arrogance. We were looking for talent they thought disposable. I called it Operation Phoenix. We identified the best of Westmere's internal minds, the quiet thinkers, the overlooked creators, the problem solvers buried under bureaucracy. People like Marcia Dean. I still remember her from my first year at Westmere, a senior analyst who taught me the logistics modeling software on my second week. While Douglas barked down directives and took credit for strategies I'd spent nights building, Marcia pulled me aside during coffee breaks and said, "Never underestimate the value of clean data and quiet patience." She was the best mind in that building. Westmere demoted her 2 years ago, something about restructuring. Now, she sat across from me at Redwood's R&D floor, her glasses fogged from excitement, her fingers already dragging models into our development environment like she'd never left. "You were always the one to watch," she said as we shook hands. "But now you're the one to follow." Oscar came next, the savant in delivery optimization who once shaved 30 hours off a cross-regional shipping map and never even got a thank you email. Douglas couldn't stand how fast his mind moved. Oscar didn't care until they cut his bonus during a budget neutralization quarter. We brought him in as director of logistics strategy. "About time someone understood that traffic patterns are emotional," he said. "Cities breathe, and shipping routes need to learn how to breathe with them." Within a month, Redwood's systems ran smoother than I'd ever imagined. Our warehouse-to-dock times dropped below 12 minutes. Carrier coordination was so seamless that clients began sending us thank you notes with their payments. Not emails. Notes. Handwritten ones. And Westmere? They kept bleeding. By Q2, they'd lost 5 more clients, some to Redwood, some just gone. Their quarterly revenue dipped so low that whispers of restructuring turned into full-volume alarm bells. The layoffs hit C-level next. Their CIO resigned. Their COO retired. Regina Hahn, their general counsel, disappeared from the website entirely. I didn't celebrate that one. She had been part of the problem, sure, but she was also someone who once told me, "You've got something special, Cole. Don't let the suits dilute it." Maybe she meant it. Maybe she just saw the storm coming. The final blow came when their creditors stepped in. Their stock tanked to under $7, a number that once would have triggered a family meeting in the Wren household. But now, it triggered fire sales, panic, emails from their board to investors using words like liquidity event and unforeseen market volatility. It was all avoidable. I didn't gloat. Not really. I didn't post interviews or join panels to dissect their fall. I didn't give quotes about poetic justice. I didn't need to. The press said everything for me. Redwood's horizon redefines freight efficiency. Cole Wren, from family scapegoat to logistics visionary. The quiet genius who took down an empire he built. But the moment that settled it all, the moment that put everything into focus, was the day Redwood acquired Westmere's old headquarters. It was a fire sale auction. Julian didn't even tell me we were bidding until after we won. I stood in front of the building on 51st and Elridge, looking up at its glass-paneled facade, the same panels I used to walk beneath every morning wondering if I'd ever be more than a shadow in that place. Now it was empty. Well, almost. When the keys were officially turned over, Julian handed them to me with a half-smile. "You built this once," he said. "Figure it's only right you decide what to do with it." I walked those halls slowly. The lobby was still marble, still cold. The reception desk still bore the Wren family crest, subtle but present. The conference room still held the ghosts of 1,000 dismissals, 1,000 smirks, 1,000 silences that told me I didn't belong. But I wasn't here to haunt this place. I was here to bury it. The executive suite, Douglas's old office, was still intact. Same leather chairs, same walnut desk. I ran my hand across the surface, remembering all the times I'd stood across from it, pitching solutions that were too radical, too expensive, not in alignment with the Wren legacy. This desk had never once held an original thought. It had only sat in the reflection of other people's work. I didn't take the office. I didn't even keep the furniture. We cleared the top floor and turned it into an open-air design space, a think tank with live collaboration screens, sandbox servers, and ambient lighting meant to keep ideas flowing. And I gave the best corner spot, floor-to-ceiling view, private alcove, built-in espresso bar, to Marcia. Because power shouldn't be hoarded. It should be shared. The rest of the building followed suit. We called it Redwood Annex Departments from our downtown campus slowly migrated over. Not for optics, but because the bones of the place were strong. It had just been built on the wrong foundation before. Now, it served something real. We left the Wren crest on the lobby floor intentionally, but we covered it in glass and laid a steel plaque over it with 4 words etched deep: "Respect is not inherited." The press asked if I wanted to speak on the acquisition. I declined. I let the building speak for itself. That night, after the final department moved in, I stood in the old boardroom. The same one where Douglas laughed at me, where Celia stared down at her fork and said nothing. I looked around and saw new faces. My team. Collaborators. Dreamers. No silence. No smirks. Just fire. And as I stood there, hand resting on the table that once made me feel small, I whispered something. Not to anyone in the room, but to the man I used to be. You made it out. And I had. Westmere didn't collapse because of me. It collapsed because it never knew how to hold the people who carried it. All I did was let go. He showed up without warning. No appointment, no email, no assistant calling ahead. Just walked through Redwood's glass front doors in a suit that looked slept in, the shoulders wrinkled, the lapel curled like it had seen too many anxious hands. Security called me immediately. I was reviewing a beta interface for Horizon Stream when my phone lit up with a single message. Douglas Wren is in the lobby. Alone. Says he just wants a word. For a moment, I didn't respond. I just stared at the screen, fingers hovering over the keyboard. I hadn't seen him in almost a year. Not since the family dinner that ended everything. Not since the lawsuit. Not since Redwood bought the building he once called his kingdom. I wasn't even sure what I'd say if I saw him. Part of me didn't want to say anything. Another part. The builder in me, the man who believed in closure as much as strategy, knew I had to. I messaged back. Let him in. One-on-one only. Bring him to Conference 6B. No cameras. 6B was one of the smaller glass-paneled rooms on the third floor. Clean, modern, just enough space for hard truths without the theater of an audience. When I walked in, Douglas was already seated, hands clasped on the table, shoulders slouched like something in him had collapsed, and he hadn't figured out how to stand it back up. He looked older. Not in the natural way. This wasn't time. This was defeat. The circles under his eyes weren't from age. They were from months of losing things he thought were his by birthright. I took the seat across from him without offering a handshake. He looked at me, eyes sunken but clear. You destroyed my company, he said quietly. The words hung there, trembling in the space between us. I didn't flinch. No, I said. You did that. I just stopped enabling you. He blinked slowly. No denial. No immediate defense. Just a long breath, the kind someone takes when they know the ground has shifted permanently beneath them. I underestimated you, he said. You didn't see me at all, I corrected. You saw an asset. A son-in-law. Someone easy to contain. He nodded once, almost like he'd rehearsed the agreement. I didn't think you had it in you. That made me laugh, just once, under my breath. You mean you didn't think I'd do it without you? You thought I needed the Wren name. That I was lucky to be tolerated at your table. He winced, but didn't argue. There was a long silence. The kind that usually ends with someone standing up and walking out. But Douglas stayed seated. I came here because I have nothing left to offer anyone, he said. I waited. He looked up at me, voice thin. No job. No board seat. Not even a chair on a foundation committee. No one returns my calls. They say I'm radioactive. That's what happens when your only currency is control, I said. And you lose it. He pressed his lips together. His hands gripped each other tighter on the table. Celia left, he added quietly, like that piece still shocked him. I didn't react. I had heard. Through mutual acquaintances, whispers at events, and eventually through the quiet disappearance of her name from Westmere's legal transition notices. Celia had stayed with him through the worst of it, defended him during the lawsuit, doubled down on the family's image, until the walls completely fell. When Redwood hired a forensic auditor to go through Westmere's leftover accounts, we discovered millions in unpaid vendor obligations and off-the-book transactions linked to board members. I never made any of it public, but the stink had already spread. Douglas leaned forward now, his voice lower. Is there anything left for me? At Redwood. With you. There it was. I kept my face still. Measured. You're asking for a job? I said. I'm asking for a place, he whispered. The man who once laughed at me for requesting a raise. Who silenced me at every meeting. Who watched as his daughter stared through me at boardroom tables. Now sitting across from me in my company, asking for a foothold. I built everything, he said, too quickly. That name meant something. No, I said. It didn't. It was a shadow people stood under because they had nowhere else to go. You didn't build people. You used them. He looked down, ashamed or pretending to be. I couldn't tell anymore. He had always been so good at wearing the face the room needed. I'm not looking for revenge, I told him. And I'm not interested in humiliating you. That's why I never gave interviews. That's why I never used your name in any public statement. But you and I both know, if I let you step into this place now, I undo everything we've built. I'm not asking for an office, he said. Just something. Anything. I stood. Douglas, your name never respected mine. Now my outrank's yours. That's not revenge. That's balance. That's what happens when silence becomes strategy. His shoulders sagged. I walked to the door and held it open. That's the last truth I have for you, I said. And the only one I owe you. He didn't speak again. He just stood slowly, gathered his coat, and left. I watched him walk through the building, the one he once ruled, now full of people who didn't recognize him. No one paused. No one greeted him. He passed like a ghost, drifting through the halls of a legacy he no longer belonged to. When the door finally clicked shut behind him, I stood there for a while, hands still on the handle. That was the last time I saw Douglas Wren, and the only time I ever saw him small. 1 year later, I stood at the center of a room I never imagined being invited into, let alone celebrated in. The Innovator of the Year ceremony was hosted at the Grand Meridian in Midtown, a place more accustomed to hosting heads of state than logistics nerds like me. But tonight, the room sparkled under crystal chandeliers, and the crowd wasn't made up of silver-tongued CEOs trying to out-toast each other. It was thinkers, engineers, builders, founders, people who knew the value of dirty hands and sleepless nights. When my name was called, the applause felt different than anything I'd ever known. It wasn't polite. It wasn't inherited. It wasn't coaxed by politics or last names or marriage ties. It was real, earned. And I felt every second of it as I walked toward the stage. I paused at the podium, scanning the crowd. No one from the Wren family was in the room. Not Celia. Not Douglas. Not a cousin or niece or distant relative trying to save face. That part of my story had finally ended. What remained were faces I respected, my team at Redwood, new industry leaders, and the former misfits we had built something unshakable with. I didn't speak long. I spent years thinking my worth was something I had to prove to people who refused to see it. I began. I thought if I worked harder, stayed quiet, didn't ask for too much, I'd eventually earn respect. That someone would hand me the keys to the door I kept trying to knock down. But doors built by other people will always come with locks you weren't meant to open. I paused, watching a few heads nod. I built Project Horizon out of necessity, but I built Redwood out of defiance. And now I know, respect isn't given to those who wait patiently at the table. It's earned by those who build their own. The applause was loud, but I barely heard it. I walked off stage feeling weightless, lighter than I had in years. Not because I won something, but because I no longer needed anyone's permission to exist in my own power. That realization stayed with me as I moved through the after-event conversations, handshakes, flashes of cameras, congratulations from strangers who knew me only by headlines and outcomes. They didn't know the long nights, the silence, the ache of a marriage that had already ended long before I left. But they didn't have to. That wasn't the legacy I wanted to carry. Later, as I slipped out onto the balcony to escape the noise, I found myself staring at the skyline. A sea of lit windows and moving light, the very machinery I once believed I had to fight to survive. Now, I was part of it. I'd reshaped it. That's when she approached. A young woman, maybe mid-20s. Clipboard under her arm, eyes hesitant but curious. She wasn't dressed like press. She had the look of someone who wasn't sure she belonged in the room but showed up anyway. "Excuse me, Mr. Wren?" I turned. "Just Cole," I said. She nodded. "Sorry, I work in supply chain modeling. Entry level. This is my first time at one of these events." "Then you're in the right place," I said. "Because everyone here was entry level once. They just don't always admit it." She smiled, then swallowed, hesitating again. "Can I ask you something?" "Go ahead." Her voice was quiet. "How do you know when it's time to stop being loyal?" That question hit harder than I expected. Not because it surprised me, but because I had asked it so many times myself. In silence, in doubt, in the moments when I still believed staying meant strength, I looked her in the eyes and said, "When loyalty starts costing you your identity." She blinked. Her mouth opened, then closed again. "And what if they call you ungrateful? Then you know you've stopped being disposable." She smiled, but there were tears building in the corners of her eyes. I knew that looked too well. I didn't ask what her story was. I didn't need to. She thanked me and left. Not in a rush. Just with a little more certainty in her step. And that was it. No thunder. No finale. Just a quiet echo of what I had lived through. A new generation asking the same questions I once carried like weights. Only now, someone like me was there to answer them. The next morning, I returned to Redwood as usual. No fanfare. No press waiting outside. Just the smell of coffee brewing in the shared kitchen, the buzz of code humming through servers, the sound of real work happening. My kind of music. Marcia was already in her corner office, now officially named the Phoenix Suite by the team. Oscar was pacing the corridor near R&D, tossing out ideas for the beta rollout of Horizon Stream. Everyone was busy building. Still hungry. Still proud. That afternoon, I walked the halls of Redwood Annex, the same building Douglas once owned, once ruled from with silence and inherited confidence. Now it was humming with laughter, motion, collaboration. Not one trace of the old regime remained. Even the gold-framed portraits of Ren executives had been replaced with digital panels displaying team accomplishments. A rotating feed of impact, not ego. I paused near the entrance where we'd mounted the plaque. Respect is not inherited. People took selfies with it now. Visitors asked about its meaning. Interns told me it made them feel seen. And me? I felt finished. Not done, but finished. That wound, the one I'd carried for so long. The ache of being invisible in a room I helped build, that wound had finally closed. I left the office a little early that day. No destination in mind. Just the feeling of air against my face as I walked through the city. This time, I wasn't chasing anything. I wasn't proving anything. I was just free. That night, I sat alone on my balcony, a glass of quiet scotch in hand, thinking back to the man who once asked for a 10% raise and got laughed out of a room. That man didn't disappear. He evolved. They tried to make me feel small. They tried to make me grateful for scraps. They tried to erase my name from the story I wrote. But here I was. Not a whisper behind a curtain. Not a signature buried beneath someone else's crest. A name. Carved, spoken, respected. Mine. And for the first time, it meant something.